Fundamental Education by Samael Aun Weor. Part 2. Chapter 19. Intelligence. We have been able to verify that many teachers of universal history in the Western world often ridicule Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl, Moses, Krishna, etc. Undoubtedly, we have also been able to verify time and again the sarcasm, the mockery, the irony hurled by teachers against ancient religions, against the gods, against mythology, etc. All of this is precisely a lack of intelligence. In schools, colleges, and universities, religious topics should be treated with more respect, with a great sense of veneration, with true creative intelligence. Religious forms contain eternal values and are organized according to the psychological and historical needs of each nation, of each race. All religions have the same principles, the same eternal values, and are only differentiated by their own religious form. It is not intelligent for a Christian to ridicule the religion of Buddha, the Hebrew religion, and Hindu religion, because all religions rest on the same foundations. The satire of many intellectuals against religions and their founders is due to Marxist poison that in these times is intoxication all weak minds. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities should orientate their pupils on the path of true respect for their fellow men. The boor who, in the name of a theory of any type, ridicules temples, religions, sects, schools, or spiritual societies is, by all means, perverse and despicable. On leaving the classroom, students have to deal with people of all religions, schools, and sects, and the fact of not even knowing how to maintain the proper composure in a temple is not intelligent. On leaving the classroom after 10 or 15 years of study, young people find themselves as slow and asleep as the rest of human beings, as full of vacuity and lack of intelligence as the first day that they entered school. It is imperative for students to develop, amongst other things, the emotional center, because the intellect is not everything. It is necessary to learn to feel the intimate harmonies of life, the beauty of the solitary tree, the singing of a bird in the forest, a symphony of music, and the colors of a beautiful sunset. It is also necessary to feel and profoundly understand all the horrible contrasts of life, such as the cruel and merciless social order of this age in which we live, the streets filled with unhappy mothers who with their malnourished and starving children beg for a piece of bread, the ugly buildings where thousands of poor families live, the repugnant roads where thousands of cars circulate propelled with fuel which harms organisms. The student who leaves the classroom has to face not only his own selfishness and his own problems, but also the selfishness of all people and the multiple problems of human society. Gravest of all is that the student who leaves the classroom, although having had intellectual preparation, does not have intelligence, his conscience is asleep. He has deficient preparation for the struggle with life. The time has arrived to investigate and discover what is that which is called intelligence. Dictionaries and encyclopedias are incapable of seriously defining intelligence. Without intelligence, there can never be radical transformation nor true happiness, and it is very rare to find truly intelligent people in life. The important thing in life is not only to know the word intelligence, but to experience in ourselves its deep meaning. Many are those who boast of being intelligent. There is no drunkard who does not boast of being intelligent, and Karl Marx, believing himself intelligent too, wrote his materialist farce that has cost the world the loss of eternal values, the shooting of thousands of priests of different religions, the rape of Christian, Buddhist nuns, etc., the destruction of many temples, the torture of thousands and millions of people, etc. Anyone can boast of being intelligent. The difficulty is to truly be intelligent. It is not by acquiring more bookish information, more knowledge, more experiences, more things to dazzle people with, more money to buy judges and policemen, etc., that one will obtain intelligence. It is not with that more that one is able to have intelligence. Those who assume that intelligence can be conquered with the process of more are absolutely mistaken. It is urgent to understand in depth and in all the areas of the subconscious and unconscious mind that the pernicious process of more is due to the fact that deep down hides very secretly the beloved ego, the myself, who desires and always wants more and more to fatten and strengthen itself. This Mephistopheles that we carry within, this Satan, this ego, this self says, I have more money, more beauty, more intelligence than him, more prestige, more astuteness, etc. Whoever wants to truly understand what intelligence is should learn to feel it, should live it and experience it through profound meditation. Everything that people accumulate in the rotten grave of the unfaithful memory, intellectual information, experiences of life, are always fatally translated in terms of more and more, so that they never get to know the deep meaning of everything that is accumulated. Many people read a book and then store it within the memory, satisfied of having accumulated more information, but when they are called to answer for the written doctrine in the book they read, it happens that they do not know the profound meaning of the teaching. However, the ego wants more and more information, more and more books even when it has not lived the doctrine of any of them. Intelligence is not obtained with more bookish information, or with more experience, or more money, or more prestige. Intelligence can blossom in us when we understand the whole process of the ego, when we understand in depth all that psychological automatism of the more. It is vital to understand that the mind is the basic center of more. In fact, more is the same psychological ego which demands, and the mind is its fundamental nucleus. Whoever wants to be truly intelligent should resolve to die not only at the superficial, intellectual level, but also in all the subconscious and unconscious areas of the mind. When the ego dies, when the ego is totally dissolved, the only thing that is left in us is the real being, the true being, the much coveted and very difficult, authentic intelligence. People think that the mind is creative. They are mistaken. The ego is not creative, and the mind is the basic nucleus of the ego. Intelligence is creative because it is of the being, it is an attribute of the being. We should not confuse the mind with intelligence. Those who assume that intelligence is something that can be cultivated like a greenhouse flower, something that can be bought like nobility titles or possessing an excellent library are radically and absolutely mistaken. It is necessary to deeply understand all the processes of the mind, all the reactions, the psychological more which accumulates, etc. Only in this way will the ardent flame of intelligence burst forth in us in a natural and spontaneous way. As the Mephistopheles we carry within dissolves, the fire of the creative intelligence manifests itself gradually within us until it shines in a burning manner. Our true being is love, and from such love is born real and authentic intelligence, which does not belong to time. Chapter 20. Vocation. With the exception of totally handicapped people, every human being has to serve a purpose in life. The difficult thing is knowing what each individual is good at. If there is something truly important in this world, it is to know ourselves. Rare is he who knows himself, and even when it seems incredible, it is difficult to find one person in life who has developed a sense of vocation. When someone is fully convinced of the role he has to perform in life, he then makes out of his vocation and apostleship a religion, and becomes by fact and his own right an apostle of humanity. Whoever knows his vocation, or whoever is able to discover it for himself, goes through a tremendous change. He does not seek success anymore. Little is his interest in money, fame, and gratitude. His pleasure is then in the joy it gives him, having responded to an intimate, profound, unknown call or his own internal essence. The most interesting thing of all these is that the vocational sense has nothing to do with the ego. Although it appears strange, the ego abhors our own vocation because the ego only desires substantial monetary earnings, position, fame, etc. The sense of vocation is something that belongs to our own inner essence. It is something very internal, very profound, very intimate. The vocational sense leads man to undertake with true intrepidity and disinterest the most tremendous projects, risking all types of sufferings and calvaries. It is then normal that the ego abhors the true vocation. The sense of vocation leads us in fact along the path of legitimate heroism, even when we have to stoically endure all types of infamies, treacheries, and slander. The day a man can tell the truth, I know who I am and what my true vocation is, from that instant he begins to live with true uprightness and love. A man like this lives in his work and his work in him. In fact, there are only very few men who can talk like this with true sincerity of heart. Those who speak like this are the select, the ones who have the sense of vocation in a superlative degree. To find our true vocation is undoubtedly the most serious social problem, the problem that is found at the very foundation of all of society's problems. To find or discover our true, individual vocation is, as a matter of fact, equivalent to discovering a very precious treasure. When a person undoubtedly finds with entire certainty his true and legitimate function, he makes himself with this sole fact irreplaceable. When our vocation corresponds totally and in an absolute way to the position that we occupy in life, we then perform our job as a true apostleship, without any covetousness and without a desire for power. Then the job, instead of causing in us covetousness, boredom, or a desire to change jobs, brings us true, profound, intimate joy even when we have to patiently endure painful burdens. In practice, we have been able to verify that when the position does not correspond to the individual's vocation, then he only thinks in terms of more. The mechanism of the ego is more. More money, more fame, more projects, etc., and as is natural, the subject often becomes hypocritical, exploitative, cruel, merciless, intransigent, etc. If we study bureaucracy in detail, we can verify that it is rare in life that a job corresponds to individual vocation. If we study in detail the proletariat's different trade unions, we can prove for ourselves that only in very rare occasions does a job correspond to an individual's vocation. When we carefully observe the privileged classes, whether they are from the Eastern or Western world, we can prove the total lack of the vocational sense. The so-called rich kids now carry out armed assaults, rape defenseless women, etc., to kill boredom. Not having found their place in life, they go around disoriented and become rebels without a cause for a change. The chaotic state of humanity in these times of world crisis is horrifying. Nobody is happy with their work because the position does not correspond to the vocation. Job applications pour in because no one has a desire to die of hunger, but the applications do not correspond to the vocation of those who apply. Many drivers should have been doctors or engineers. Many lawyers should have been ministers, and many ministers should have been tailors. Many shoe shiners should have been ministers, and many ministers should have been shiners, etc. People are in places that do not correspond to them, that have nothing to do with their true, individual vocation. Due to this, the social machinery functions terribly. This is similar to an engine that is manufactured with parts that do not correspond to it, and the result inevitably has to be disaster, failure, and the absurd. In practice, we have been able to verify up to the hilt that when one does not have a vocational disposition to be a guide, religious instructor, political leader, or a director of some spiritualist, scientific, literary or philanthropic association, then one only thinks in terms of more and dedicates himself to carrying out projects and more projects with secret purposes that cannot be confessed. It is obvious that when a position does not correspond to individual vocation, the result is exploitation. In these terribly materialistic times in which we live, a teacher's position is being arbitrarily occupied by many merchants who do not even remotely have a vocation for the teaching profession. The result of such infamy is exploitation, cruelty, and a lack of true love. Many people practice the teaching profession with the exclusive purpose of getting money to pay their studies in the faculty of medicine, law, or engineering, or simply because they cannot find anything else to do. The victims of such intellectual fraud are the students. A true vocational teacher is difficult to find today, and it is the greatest joy that students of schools, colleges, and universities are able to have. The vocation of a teacher is wisely translated by a verse of moving prose by Gabriela Mistral, titled The Prayer of the Teacher. The teacher says, talking to the divine, to the secret master, "Give me the unique love of my school, that not even the burning of beauty be capable of stealing my tenderness from all moments. Master, make my fervor everlasting and my disenchantment transitory. Uproot from me this impure desire of misinterpreted justice that still disturbs me, the wretched insinuation of protest that rises from me when they hurt me. Let their lack or understanding not hurt me, or the forgetfulness of those whom I taught sadden me. Grant me to be motherlier than mothers, to be able to love and defend like them what is not flesh of my flesh. Give me the capacity to make one of my girls my perfect verse and leave placed in her my most penetrating melody for the time when my lips will sing no more. Demonstrate your gospel to be possible in my time, so that I may not renounce the daily and hourly battle. Who can measure the marvelous psychic influence of a teacher so inspired with so much tenderness because of the sense of her vocation? An individual finds his vocation in one of these three ways. Firstly, the self. Discovery of a special capacity. Secondly, the vision of an urgent need. Thirdly, the very rare guidance of parents and teachers who discovered the vocation of a pupil through the observation of his aptitudes. Many individuals have discovered their vocation in a specific, critical moment of their life, when faced with a serious situation that demanded an immediate remedy. Gandhi was ordinary lawyer when, because of an attempt against the rights of the Hindus in South Africa, he cancelled his return trip to India and stayed to defend the cause of his compatriots. A momentary need led him towards the vocation of his life. The great benefactors of humanity have found their vocation when faced with a crisis situation that demanded an immediate remedy. Let us remember Oliver Cromwell, the father of English liberties, Benito Juarez, the forger of the New Mexico, José de San Martin and Simon Bolivar, fathers of South American independence, etc. Jesus the Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Hermes, Zoroaster, Confucius, Fuji, etc. were men who, in a specific moment of history, knew how to understand their true vocation and felt called by an internal voice that emanated from their innermost being. Fundamental education is called to discover by diverse methods the latent capacity of students. The methods that extemporaneous pedagogy is using in these times to discover the vocation of pupils are undoubtedly cruel, absurd, and merciless. Vocational questionnaires have been elaborated by merchants who arbitrarily occupy the position of teachers. In some countries, before entering primary and vocational colleges, pupils are submitted to the most horrible psychological cruelties. They are asked questions on mathematics, civics, biology, etc. The cruelest thing of these methods are the famous psychological tests, the index of IQ, intimately related with mental swiftness. According to the type of answer, and according to how they do, the student is then imprisoned in one of the three baccalaureates. First, physics mathematics, out of which come engineers, architects, astronomers, pilots, etc. Second, biological sciences, out of which come pharmacists, nurses, biologists, general practitioners. Third, social sciences, out of which come lawyers, writers, doctor of philosophy, managing directors. The study program of each country is different, and it is clear that the three different baccalaureates do not exist in all countries. In many countries there exists only one baccalaureate, and having completed in the student goes on to university. In some nations the vocational ability of the student is not tested, and he enters a faculty with the desire of having a profession to earn a living even when this profession does not coincide with his innate tendencies, with his vocational sense. There are countries where the vocational ability of the students is tested, and there are nations where it is not tested. It is absurd not to know how to vocationally orientate students, not to test their genuine abilities and innate tendencies. Vocational questionnaires and all that jargon of questions, psychological tests, IQ, indexes, etc., are stupid. Those methods of vocational tests are useless because the mind has its moments of crisis, and if the test is done in one of these moments, the result is failure and disorientation for the student. Teachers have been able to verify that a student's mind has, like the sea, its high and low tides, its plus and its minus. There exists a biorhythm in masculine and feminine glands. There also exists a biorhythm for the mind. At specific times, the masculine glands are found in plus and the feminine glands in minus, or vice versa. The mind also has its plus and its minus. We suggest to whoever wants to know the science of biorhythm to study the famous work titled Biorhythm, written by the eminent sage, the Rosicrucian Gnostic, Dr. Arnold Krumheller, Dr. Colonel of the Mexican Army and professor at the Faculty of Medicine in Berlin. We emphatically affirm that an emotional crisis or a state of psychic nervousness, when faced with the difficult situation of an exam, can lead the student to failure during the pre-vocational exam. We affirm that any abuse of the motor center produced perhaps by sports, by an excessive walk or by arduous physical work, etc., can originate an intellectual crisis even when the mind is found in plus and leads the student to failure during the pre-vocational exam. We affirm that any crisis related with the instinctive center, perhaps in combination with sexual pleasure or with the emotional center, etc., can lead the student to failure during the pre-vocational exam. We affirm that any sexual crisis, a spell of suppressed sexuality, sexual abuse, etc., can exert a disastrous influence on the mind, leading it to failure during a pre-vocational exam. Fundamental education teaches that the vocational germs are found deposited not only in the intellectual center, but also in each of the other 4 centers of the psychophysiology of the organic machine. It is urgent to take into account the 5 psychic centers called intellect, emotion, movement, instinct, and sex. It is absurd to think that the intellect is the only center or cognition. If the intellectual center is examined exclusively with the purpose of discovering vocational attitudes of a specific individual, beside committing a grave injustice that results, for a fact, very damaging to the individual and to society, an error is incurred because the germs of vocation are not only found contained in the intellectual center, but also found in each of the other 4 psychophysiological centers of the individual. The only obvious path that exists to discover the true vocation of pupils is true love. If parents and teachers join, by mutual agreement, to investigate in the home and at school, to observe, in detail, all the actions of the students, they would discover the innate tendencies of each student. That is the only obvious path that will permit parents and teachers to discover the vocational sense of students. This demands true love from parents and teachers, and it is obvious that if true love does not exist from parents and real vocational teachers, capable of truly sacrificing themselves for their disciples, then such an enterprise is impractical. If governments truly want to save society, they need to expel the merchants from the temple with the lash of willpower. A new cultural age should be initiated, diffusing everywhere the doctrine of fundamental education. Students should defend their rights courageously and demand true vocational teachers from governments. Fortunately, there exists the formidable weapon of strikes, and students have this weapon. In some countries, there already exists within schools, colleges, and universities certain guiding teachers who are not really vocational. The position that they occupy does not coincide with their innate tendencies. These teachers cannot orientate the rest because they cannot even orientate themselves. True vocational teachers capable of intelligently orientating students are needed with urgency. It is necessary to know that due to the plurality of the ego, the human being automatically play diverse roles in the theater of life. Boys and girls have a role for school, another for the street, and another for the home. If one wants to discover the vocation of a young person, one has to observe them at school, at home, and even in the street. This work of observation can only be carried out by parents and true teachers in intimate partnership. Among antiquated pedagogy, there also exists the system of observing grades to deduce vocation. The student that excels in civics with the highest grades is then classified as a possible lawyer, and the one who excels in biology is defined as a potential doctor, and he who excels in mathematics as a possible engineer. This absurd system of deducing vocations is too empirical because the mind has its highs and lows, not only in the total form now known, but also in certain, particular, special states. Many writers who at school were terrible students of grammar excelled in life as true masters of the language. Many noteworthy engineers always had the worst grade in mathematics at school, and multitudes of doctors failed in biology and natural sciences at school. It is unfortunate that many parents, instead of studying their children's aptitudes, only see in them the continuation of their beloved psychological ego, their myself. Many lawyer fathers want their children to continue in the lawyer's office, and many business owners want their children to continue handling their egoistical interests without being the least bit interested in the vocational sense of their children. The ego always wants to ascend, climb to the top of the staircase, make itself felt, and when parents' ambitions fail, they want to obtain, through their children, what they could not obtain for themselves. These ambitious parents put their boys and girls into careers and positions that have nothing to do with their vocational sense. Chapter 21. The Three Brains. The revolutionary psychology of the new era affirms that the organic machine of the intellectual animal mistakenly called man exists in a tricentered or tricerebral way. The first brain is enclosed within the cranial body. The second brain concretely corresponds to the dorsal spine with its central medulla and all its nervous branches. The third brain is not specifically placed in any part of the body. It is constituted by the sympathetic nervous plexus and, in general, by all the specific nervous centers of the human organism. The first brain is the thinking center. The second brain is the center of movement, commonly called the motor center. The third brain is the emotional center. It is clearly proved in practice that every abuse of the thinking brain produces excessive waste of intellectual energy. It is then logical to affirm fearlessly that asylums are true cemeteries of intellectually dead people. Harmonious and balanced sports are useful for the motor brain, but the abuse of sports means the excessive waste of motor energies, and the result is often disastrous. It is not absurd to affirm that people who are dead in the motor center exist. Such dead people are known as hemiplegics, paraplegics, people with progressive paralysis, etc. A sense of aesthetics, mysticism, ecstasy, superior music is necessary to cultivate the emotional center, but the abuse of such brain produces a useless waste and a squandering of emotional energy. The existentialists of the new wave, the rock fans, the sensual pseudo-artists of modern art, the morbid, passionate people of sensuality abuse the emotional brain. Even when it seems incredible, death certainly processes itself in thirds in each person. It has been verified up to the hilt that every illness has its basis in any of the three brains. The great law has wisely deposited in each of the three brains of the intellectual animal a definite capital of vital values. To save such capital means, as a matter of fact, to prolong life. To squander said capital produces death. Archaic traditions that have come to us from the terrifying night of centuries affirm that the average human life on the ancient continent Mu, located in the Pacific Ocean, oscillated between 12 and 15 centuries. With the passing of the centuries through the ages, the mistaken use of the three brains shortened life little by little. In the sunny country of Kem, in the old Egypt of the pharaohs, the average human life only reached to 140 years. Actually, in these modern times of petrol and celluloid, in this age of existentialism and rock rebels, the average human life, according to some insurance companies, is barely 50 years. The Marxist-Leninist gentlemen of the Soviet Union, braggarts and liars as usual, are over there going around saying that they have invented very special serums to lengthen life. But the old man Khrushchev is not 80 years old yet, and he has to ask one foot's permission to lift the other. In the center of Asia, there exists a religious community made up of old people that do not even remember their youth. The average lifespan of these old people oscillates between 400 and 500 years. The entire secret of long life of these Asiatic monks consists in the wise use of the three brains. The balanced and harmonious functionalism of the three brains means the saving of vital values and, as a logical consequence, prolongation of life. There exists a cosmic law known as the equalization of the vibrations of many sources. The monks of said monastery know how to use said law through the use of the three brain. Extemporaneous pedagogy leads students to the abuse of the thinking brain, whose results psychiatry already knows. The intelligent cultivation of the three brains is fundamental education. In the ancient mysteries of Babylon, Greece, India, Persia, Egypt, etc., students receive direct, integral information of their three brains through precept, dance, music, etc., intelligently combined. The theaters of ancient times formed part of the school. Drama, comedy, tragedy, combined with special mime, music, oral teaching, etc., serve to inform the three brains of each individual. At that time, students did not abuse the thinking brain, and they know how to use intelligently and, in a balanced way, their three brains. Dances of the mysteries of Eleusis in Greece, the theater of Babylon, the sculpture of Greece were always used to transmit knowledge to disciples. Now, in these degenerated times of rock, the confused and disoriented students walk on the tenebrous path of mental abuse. At present, true creative systems for the harmonious cultivation of the three brains do not exist. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities only address the unfaithful memory of the bored students that wait with anxiety for the hour when they can leave the classroom. It is urgent and indispensable to know how to combine intellect, movement, and emotion with the purpose of taking integral information to the three brains of students. It is absurd to inform one brain. The first brain is not the only one of cognition. It is criminal to abuse the thinking brain of students. Fundamental education should lead students to the path of harmonious development. Revolutionary psychology clearly teaches that the three brains have three types of independent, totally different associations. These three brains have three types of independent, totally different associations. These three types of associations evoke different types of impulses of the being. This gives us, as a matter of fact, three different personalities that do not possess anything in common either in their nature or in their manifestations. The revolutionary psychology of the New Age teaches that in each person there exist three distinct psychological aspects. With one part of the psychic essence, we want one thing; with another part, we desire something decidedly different, and thanks to the third part we do something totally opposed. In an instant of supreme pain, perhaps the loss of a beloved one or any other intimate catastrophe, the emotional personality reaches even desperation, while the intellectual personality asks itself the why of all this tragedy, and the personality of movement only wants to escape from the scene. These three distinct, different, and many times even contradictory personalities should be intelligently cultivated and instructed with methods and special systems in all schools, colleges, and universities. From the psychological point of view, it becomes absurd to exclusively educate the intellectual personality. Man has three personalities that urgently need fundamental education. Chapter 22. Good and Evil. Good and evil do not exist. Something is good when it is convenient and evil when it is not convenient. Good and evil is a matter of egotistical conveniences and whims of the mind. The man who invented the fateful terms good and evil was an Atlantean called Macquarie Cronverxian, distinguished member of the Achaldan Scientific Society, located in the submerged continent of Atlantis. The elderly archaic sage never suspected the grave harm that he was going to cause humanity with the invention of those two small words. The wise Atlanteans profoundly studied all the evolutive, involutive, and neutral forces of nature, but it occurred to this old sage the idea of defining the first two forces with the terms good and evil. He called the forces of an evolutive type good, and the forces of an involutive type he baptized with the term of evil. He did not give any name to the neutral forces. Such forces are processed inside man and inside nature, the neutral forces being the point of support and equilibrium. Many centuries after the submersion of Atlantis with its famous Poseidonies, which Plato talked about in his Republic, there existed in the Oriental civilization Tikliamishana, a very ancient priest, who committed the grave error of abusing the terms of good and evil, clumsily using them to base on them a moral. The name of that priest was Armanatora. With the passing of history through countless centuries, humanity grew addicted to these two small words and converted them into the basis of all its moral codes. Nowadays, one finds these two small words even in soup. Actually, there are many reformers that want moral restoration, but who, unfortunately for them and this afflicted world, have the mind imprisoned between good and evil. Every moral bases itself on these two small words, good and evil. That is why every moral reformer is, as a matter of fact, a reactionary. The terms good and evil always serve to justify or condemn our own errors. Whoever justifies or condemns does not understand. It is intelligent to understand the development of evolutive forces, but it is not intelligent to justify them with the term good. It is intelligent to understand the processes of the involutive forces, but it is stupid to condemn them with the term of evil. Every centrifugal force can become a centripetal force. Every involutive force can become evolutive. Inside the infinite processes of energy in its evolutive state, infinite processes of energy in its involutive state exist. Inside each human being there exists various types of energy that evolve, involute and transform themselves incessantly. To justify a specific type of energy and condemn another is not understanding. The vital thing is to understand. The experience of truth has been very rare among humanity due to the concrete fact of mental imprisonment. People are imprisoned between the opposites, good and evil. The revolutionary psychology of the Gnostic movement is based on the study of the different types of energy that operate within the human organism and within nature. The Gnostic movement has revolutionary ethics that have nothing to do with the moral of reactionaries nor with the conservative and retarded terms of good and evil. Within the psychophysiological laboratory of the human organism there exists evolutive, involutive, and neutral forces that should be studied and profoundly understood. The term good stops understanding of the evolutive energies due to justification. The term evil stops understanding of the involutive forces due to condemnation. To justify or condemn does not mean to understand. Whoever wants to finish with his defects should not justify nor condemn them. It is urgent to understand our errors. To understand anger in all the levels of the mind is fundamental so that serenity and sweetness are born within us. To understand the infinite shades of covetousness is indispensable so that philanthropy and altruism are born within us. To understand lust in all levels of the mind is vital in order that true chastity is born within us. To understand envy in all the areas of the mind is enough so that the sense of cooperation and the joy for others' well-being and progress is born within us. To understand pride in all its shades and degrees is the basis for the exotic flower of humility to be born within us in a natural and simple way. To understand what the element of inertia called laziness is, not in its grotesque forms, but also in its more subtle forms, is indispensable so that the sense of activity is born within us. To understand the diverse forms of gluttony and greediness is equal to destroying the vices of the instinctive center such as banquets, drinking sprees, hunting, carnivorousness, fear of death, desires of perpetuating the ego, fear of annihilation, etc. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities advise their students to improve themselves as if the ego could become better. They advise them to acquire specific virtues as if the ego could obtain virtues, etc. It is urgent to understand that the ego never improves itself, that it is never more perfect, and he who covets virtues strengthens the ego. Total perfection is only born within us with the dissolution of the ego. Virtues are born within us in a natural and simple way when we understand our psychological defects not only at the intellectual level, but also in all the subconscious and unconscious areas of the mind. To want to improve oneself is stupid, to desire sanctify is envy, to covet virtues means strengthening the ego with the poison of covetousness. We need the total death of the ego not only at the intellectual level, but also in all the nooks, regions, areas, and corridors of the mind. When we have absolutely died, only that which is perfect is left in us, that which is saturated with virtues, that which is the essence of our intimate being, that which does not belong to time. Only by understanding in death all the infinite processes of the evolutive forces that develop inside us in here and now, only by understanding in an integral form the various aspects of the involutive forces that process themselves within us from moment to moment can we dissolve the ego. The terms good and evil serve to justify and condemn, but never to understand. Each defect has many shades, secret depths, and profundities. To understand a defect at an intellectual level does not mean to have understood it in the distinct subconscious, unconscious, and infraconscious areas of the mind. Any defect can disappear from the intellectual level and continue in the other areas of the mind. Anger disguises itself with the toga of the judge. Many covet, not being covetous. There are those who do not covet money but covet psychic powers, virtues, love, happiness here or after death, etc. Many men and women are moved and fascinated in front of people of the opposite sex, supposedly because they love beauty. Their own subconscious betrays them. Lust disguises itself as the aesthetic sense. Many envious people envy saints and do penance and beat themselves, also desiring to succeed in being saints. Many envious people envy those who sacrifice themselves for humanity, and then wanting to also be great, they scoff at those they envy and hurl against them all their defamatory drivel. There are those who feel proud because of their position, their money, their fame, and their prestige, and there are those who feel proud of their humble condition. Diogenes felt proud of the tunnel in which he slept, and when he arrived in the home of Socrates, he greeted him, saying, "Trampling your pride, Socrates. Trampling your pride." "Yes, Diogenes, with your pride you trample my pride," was Socrates' reply. Vain women curl their locks. They dress and adorn themselves with everything they can to awaken envy in other women, but vanity also disguises itself with the robe of humility. Tradition speaks of Aristippus, the Greek philosopher, who, wanting to demonstrate to the whole world his wisdom and humility, dressed in a very old robe full of holes, he grasped in his right hand the rod of philosophy and went through the streets of Athens. When Socrates saw him coming, he exclaimed, "Your vanity shows through the holes of your clothes, O Aristippus." Many are those who are in misery due to the element of laziness, but there exist people who work very hard to earn a living, but who feel laziness in studying and knowing themselves in order to dissolve the ego. There are many who abandon greed and gluttony, but unfortunately, they get drunk and go hunting. Each defect is multifaceted and develops and processes itself in a stepwise way from the lowest step of the psychological ladder to the most elevated step. Within the delicious cadence of a verse, crime is also hidden. Crime also dresses itself as a saint, as a martyr, as a chaste person, as an apostle, etc. Good and evil does not exist. Such terms only serve to look for evasive and to elude the profound and detailed study of our own defects. Chapter 23. Maternity. The life of a human begins as a simple cell, subject as is natural to the extraordinarily speedy time of living cells. Conception, gestation, and birth are always a marvelous and remarkable trio with which any creature begins life. It is really surprising to know that our first moments of existence we should live in the infinitely small, converted, each of us, in a simple microscopic cell. We begin to exist in the form of an insignificant cell, and we end life old, ancient, and overburdened with memories. The ego is memory. Many old people do not live even remotely in the present. Many elderly people live only remembering the past. Every old person is nothing but a voice and a shadow. Every elderly person is a phantom of the past, accumulated memory, and this is what continues in the genes of our descendants. Human conception is initiated with extraordinarily speedy times, but through the different processes of life, they become slower and slower each time. For many of our readers, it is convenient to remember the relativity of time. The insignificant insect that only lives a few hours in a summer afternoon seems to have hardly lived. Rather, it really lives all that a man lives in 80 years. What happens is that it lives swiftly. A man lives in 80 years everything that a planet lives in millions of years. When the zoosperm unites with the egg, gestation begins. The cell with which human life begins contains 48 chromosomes. The chromosomes are divided into genes, 100 of the latter or more. Certainly, constitute that which is a chromosome. Genes are very difficult to study because each is constituted by a few molecules that vibrate with inconceivable speed. The marvelous world of genes consulted an intermediate zone between the tridimensional world and the world of the fourth dimension. The atoms of inheritance are found in the genes. The psychological ego of our ancestors comes to impregnate the fertilized egg. In this era of electrotechnics and atomic science, it is not in any way exaggerated to affirm that the electromagnetic mark left by an ancestor that exhaled his last breath has come to imprint itself in the genes and chromosomes of the egg fertilized by a descendant. The path of life is formed with the tracks of the hooves of the horse of death. During the course of existence, different types of energy flow through the human organism. Each type of energy has its own system of action. Each type of energy is manifested in its time and in its hour. We have the digestive function at 2 months of conception, and at 4 months of conception the motor force comes into action, so intimately related with the breathing and muscular systems, going into action. The scientific spectacle of birth and death of all things is wonderful. Many sages affirm that there exists an intimate analogy between the birth of a human creature and the birth of the worlds in the sidereal space. The child is born in 9 months. At 10 months begins the growth with all its wonderful metabolisms and the symmetric and perfect development of conjunctive tissues. When the frontal fontanelle of newborns closes at 2 or 3 years of age, it is a sign that the cerebrospinal system has been left perfectly finished. Many scientists have said that nature has imagination which gives living form to everything that has been and everything that will be. Multitudes of people laugh at imagination, and some even call it the lunatic of the house. There exists much confusion around the word imagination, and there are many who confuse imagination with fantasy. Certain sages say that 2 imaginations exist. The first is called mechanical imagination, and the second intentional imagination. The first one is made up of the scrap of the mind, and the second corresponds to what is most worthy and decent inside us. Through observation and experience, we have been able to verity that there also exists a type of mechanical, morbid, infraconscious, and subjective subimagination. This type of automatic subimagination functions below the intellectual zone. Erotic images, morbid movies, risque stories with double meanings, morbid jokes, etc., often put to work in an unconscious way the mechanical subimagination. In-depth analysis has taken us to the logical conclusion that erotic dreams and wet dreams are due to the mechanical subimagination. Absolute chastity is impossible while there exists the mechanical subimagination. By any reckoning, it is perfectly clear that conscious imagination is radically different from that which is called subjective, infraconscious, subconscious mechanical imagination. Any representation can be perceived in a self-exalting and dignifying way, but subimagination of a mechanical, infraconscious, subconscious, unconscious type can betray us automatically functioning with sensual, passionate, submerged shades and images. If we want in-depth, unitotal, integral chastity, we need to watch not only the conscious imagination but also the mechanical imagination and the unconscious, automatic, subconscious, submerged subimagination. We should never forget the intimate relation existent between sex and imagination. Through in-depth meditation, we should transform every type of mechanical imagination, every form of subimagination and automatic infra-imagination into objective, conscious imagination. Objective imagination is, in itself, essentially creative. Without it, inventors could not have conceived the telephone, the radio, the airplane, etc. A woman's imagination during pregnancy is fundamental for the development of the fetus. It has been demonstrated that every mother can, with her imagination, alter the psyche of the fetus. It is urgent that a woman, during pregnancy, contemplates beautiful paintings, sublime sceneries, and listen to classical music and harmonious words. In this way, she can harmoniously work on the psyche of the baby she carries inside her. One has to know how to excuse all the whims and errors of a pregnant woman. Many intolerant men, lacking true understanding, become angry and hurt a pregnant woman. The sorrows of this woman, the afflictions caused by the husband for lack of charity, have repercussions on the gestating fetus, not only physically but also psychically. Bearing in mind the power of creative imagination, it is logical to affirm that a woman during pregnancy should not contemplate what is ugly, disagreeable, disharmonious, filthy, etc. The hour has arrived which governments should be concerned about resolving the great problems related to maternity. It is incongruous that in a society that prides itself on being Christian and democratic, it does not know how to respect and venerate the religious sense of maternity. It is monstrous to see thousands of women who are pregnant without any type of support, abandoned by their husbands and society. begging a piece of bread or a job and executing, many times, rough manual jobs in order to be able to survive with the baby they carry within. These infrahuman states of today's society, this cruelty and lack of responsibility of governing officials and of nations are indicating to us with entire clarity that democracy still does not exist. Hospitals with their maternity rooms have still not solved the problem because women can only go to said hospitals when labor approaches. Collective homes are needed with urgency. True garden cities endowed with halls and residencies for women who are pregnant and extremely poor. Clinics and kindergartens for their children are also needed. These collective homes with lodging for extremely poor women who are pregnant, filled with all types of comforts, flowers, music, harmony, beauty, etc. It would totally solve the great problem of maternity. We should understand that human society is a great family and that someone else's problems do not exist, since every problem in one way or another affects, within its respective circle, all the members of society. It is absurd to discriminate against pregnant women because of their being extremely poor. It is criminal to underestimate them, to scorn them, or to put them aside in homes for poverty-stricken people. In this society in which we live, there cannot be children and stepchildren because all of us are human beings and we have the same rights. We need to create true democracy if we really do not want to be devoured by communism. Chapter 24. Human and Personality. A man was born, lived 65 years and dies. But where was he before 1900 and where could he be after 1965? Official science knows nothing about this. This is the general format of all matters on life and death. Axiomatically, we can affirm a man dies because his time is up. There is no tomorrow for the personality of a dead man. Each day is a wave of time. Each month is another wave of time. Each year is also another wave of time, and all of these waves linked together as a whole make up the great wave of life. Time is round, and the life of the human personality is a closed curve. The life of the human personality develops in its time, is born in its time, and dies in its time. It can never exist beyond its time. This thing about time is a problem that has been studied by many sages. Undoubtedly, time is the fourth dimension. Euclid's geometry is only applicable to the three-dimensional world, but the world has 7 dimensions and the fourth is time. The human mind conceives eternity as the prolongation of time in a straight line. Nothing can be more mistaken than this concept, because eternity is the 5th dimension. Each moment of existence occurs in time and is repeated eternally. Death and life are two extremes that touch. A life ends for the man that dies, but another begins. A time ends and another begins. Death is found intimately associated with eternal return. This means that we have to return, to come back to this world after being dead, to repeat the same drama of existence. But if the human personality perishes with death, who or what returns? It is necessary to clarify once and for all that the ego is the one who continues after death, that the ego is the one which returns, and comes back to this valley of tears. It is necessary that our readers do not confuse the law of return with the theory of reincarnation taught by modern theosophy. The above-mentioned theory of reincarnation had its origins in the cult of Krishna, which is a Hindu religion of a Vedic type, unfortunately, retouched and adulterated by reformers. In the authentic, original cult of Krishna, only the heroes, the guides, those who already possess sacred individuality, are the ones who reincarnate. The pluralized ego returns, comes back rather. This is not reincarnation. The masses, the multitudes return, but that is not reincarnation. The idea of the return of things and phenomena, the idea of eternal repetition, is not very ancient, and we can find it in the Pythagorean wisdom and in the ancient cosmogony of the Hindus. The eternal return of the days and nights of Brahma, the incessant repetition of the kalpas, etc., are invariably associated in an intimate way with the Pythagorean wisdom and the law of eternal return and recurrence. Gautama, the Buddha, very wisely taught the doctrine of the eternal return and the wheel of successive lives, but his doctrine was very much adulterated by his followers. Every return implies, of course, the fabrication of a new human personality. This is formed during the first 7 years of childhood. The family environment, the life in the street and school give the human personality its original, characteristic tint. The example or our elders is definitive for the infant personality. The child learns more from example than from precept. The mistaken way of life, the absurd example, the degenerated customs of our elders give the personality of the child that peculiar, skeptical, and perverse tint of the era in which we live. In these modern times adultery has become as common as pie, and so it is quite logical that this originates dantesque scenes inside homes. There are many children that in these times have to bear, filled with pain and resentments, the lashes and beatings of the stepfather or stepmother. It is clear that in this way the personality of the child develops within the frame of pain, rancor, and hate. There exists a vulgar saying, another person's child is not wanted anywhere. Naturally, there are also exceptions, but these can be counted on the fingers of one hand, and we even have fingers left over. The disputes between father and mother about matters of jealousies, the crying and laments of the afflicted mother or the oppressed, ruined and desperate husband leave on the personality of the child an indelible mark of profound pain and melancholy that is never forgotten his entire life. In elegant houses, the proud ladies mistreat their servants when the servants go to a beauty salon or put makeup on. The pride of the ladies is mortally wounded. The child that sees all these infamous scenes feels profoundly hurt, whether he be on the side of his proud and haughty mother or from the wretched, vain, and humiliated servant, and the result is often catastrophic for the child's personality. Ever since television was invented, the unity of the family has been lost. In other times, the husband arrived from work and was welcomed by his wife with much happiness. Nowadays, the woman does not go to welcome her husband at the door because she is busy watching television. Within modern homes, the father, mother, and children seem to be zombies before the television screen. Now the husband cannot talk with his wife about any of the problems of the day, of work, etc., because she looks like a zombie watching yesterday's movie, the dantesque scenes of Al Capone, the latest fashionable dance of the new wave, etc. The children brought up in this new type of ultramodern home only think of cannons, pistols, toy machine guns to imitate and relive in their own way all the dantesque scenes of crime just as they have seen them on the television screen. It is a pity that this marvelous invention of television is used with destructive purposes. If humanity would use this invention in a dignifying way, whether it be to study natural sciences or to teach the true real art of Mother Nature, to give sublime teachings to people, then this invention would be a blessing for humanity. It could be intelligently used to cultivate the human personality. It is absurd in any count to feed a child's personality with a rhythmic, inharmonious, vulgar music. It is stupid to feed the personality of children with stories of thieves and policemen, with scenes of vice and prostitution, dramas of adultery, pornography, etc. We can see the result of such actions in the revels without a cause, the premature murderers, etc. It is unfortunate that mothers whip their children, that they beat them, that they insult them with cruel and indecent words. The result of such conduct is resentment, hate, the loss of love, etc. In practice, we have seen that children brought up among beatings, lashes, and screams become vulgar people full of boorishness and a lack of every sense of respect and veneration. It is urgent to understand the need to establish true equilibrium within homes. It is indispensable to know that sweetness and severity should be mutually balanced on the two pans of the scale of justice. The father represents severity. The mother represents sweetness. The father personifies wisdom. The mother symbolizes love. Wisdom and love, severity and sweetness mutually balance each other on the two pans of the cosmic scale. Parents should mutually balance each other for the good of the home. It is urgent, it is necessary that all parents understand the need to sow in the child's brain the eternal values of the spirit. It is unfortunate that modern children no longer possess the sense of veneration. This is due to stories of cowboys, robbers, and the police. Television, movies, etc., have perverted the mind of children. The revolutionary psychology of the Gnostic movement, in a clear and precise way, makes an in-depth difference between ego and essence. During the first 3 or 4 years of life, only the beauty of the essence manifests itself in the child. Then the child is tender, sweet, beautiful in all his psychological aspects. When the ego begins to control the young personality of the child, all the beauty of the essence starts to disappear and, in its place, come up the psychological defects typical of every human being. In the same way as we should make a distinction between ego and essence, it is also necessary to distinguish between personality and essence. The human being is born with the essence, but not with the personality. It is necessary to create the latter. Personality and essence should develop in a harmonious and balanced way. In practice, we have been able to verify that when the personality develops in an exaggerated way at the expense of the essence, the result is a rascal. Observation and the experience of many years have allowed us to understand when the essence develops totally without paying attention, in the least, to the harmonious cultivation of the personality, the result is a mystic without intellect, without personality, of noble heart but not adaptable and incapable. The harmonious development of personality and essence gives as a result brilliant men and women. In the essence, we have everything that is ours. In the personality, we have everything that is borrowed. In the essence, we have our innate qualities. In the personality, we have the example of our elders, what we have learned at home, in school, and in the streets. It is urgent that children receive nourishment for the essence and nourishment for the personality. The essence feeds itself with tenderness, limitless affection, love, music, flowers, beauty, harmony, etc. The personality should feed itself with good examples from our elders, with wise teaching at school, etc. It is indispensable that children enter primary school at the age of 7 years after having passed through nursery. Children should learn their first letter playing, so that studying becomes attractive, delightful, and happy for them. Fundamental education teaches that starting in the very nursery, each of the 3 aspects of the human personality, known as thought, movement, and action, should be taken care of so that the personality of the child develops in a harmonious and balanced way. The matter of creation of the personality of a child and its development is a very grave responsibility for parents and school teachers. The quality of the human personality depends exclusively on the type of psychological material with which it was created and nourished. There exists, among the students of psychology, much confusion surrounding personality, essence, and ego. Some confuse the personality with the essence and others confuse ego with the essence. Many are the pseudo-esoteric or pseudo-occultist schools that have as a goal of their studies the impersonal life. It is necessary to clarify that it is not the personality that we have to dissolve. It is urgent to know that we need to disintegrate the ego, the myself, and reduce it to cosmic dust. The personality is a mere vehicle of action, a vehicle that needed to be created, fabricated. In the world there exist Caligulas, Attilas, Hitleras, etc. Every type of personality, however perverse it may have been, can be radically transformed when the ego is totally dissolved. This matter of the dissolution of the ego confuses and annoys pseudo-esoterists. These people are convinced that the ego is divine. They think that the ego is the same being, the divine monad, etc. It is necessary and urgent to understand that the ego has nothing divine. This is something which cannot be postponed. The ego is the Satan of the Bible, a handful of memories, desires, passions, hates, resentments, concupiscences, adulteries, and inheritance of family, race, nations, etc. Many affirm in a stupid way that within us exists a superior or divine ego or an inferior ego. Superior or inferior are still 2 sections of the same thing. The superior ego and the inferior ego are 2 sections of the same ego. The divine being, the monad, the inner being has nothing to do with any form of ego. The being is the being and that is all. The reason for being of the being is the being. The personality in itself is only a vehicle and nothing more. Through the personality, the ego or the being can manifest itself. Everything depends on us. It is urgent to dissolve the ego so that the psychological essence of our true being manifests itself through our personality. It is indispensable that educators fully understand the need for harmoniously cultivating the three aspects of the human personality. A perfect equilibrium between personality and essence, a harmonious development of thought, emotion, and movement, a revolutionary ethics make up the foundation of fundamental education. Chapter 25. Adolescence. The moment has arrived to abandon completely the false modesty and prejudices related to the sexual problem. It is necessary to understand in a clear and precise way the sexual problem of adolescence of both sexes. At 14 years of age, there appears in the organism of the adolescent the sexual energy that flows in an enslaving way through the neurosympathetic system. This special type of energy transforms the human organism, modifying the voice of a man and originating the ovarian function in a woman. The human organism is a real factory that transforms gross elements into refined, vital substances. The foods that we ingest into our stomach pass through multiple transformations and refinements until they definitely culminate in that semi-solid, semi-liquid substance mentioned by Paracelsus with the same of N. seminis, semen entity, that flexible, ductile, transparent liquid that sperm contains in itself, in potential, all the seeds of life. Gnosticism recognizes in the sperm the chaos, from where life emerges with vehemence. The ancient medieval alchemists such as Paracelsus, Sendivogius, Nicholas Flamel, Raymond Lulio, etc., studied with profound veneration the N. seminis or mercury of the secret philosophy. This vitriol is a true elixir intelligently elaborated by nature within the seminal vesicles. In this mercury of ancient wisdom, in this semen, all the possibilities of existence are really found. It is unfortunate that many young people, because of the lack of true psychological orientation, give themselves up to the vice of masturbation, or they unfortunately deviate onto the infrasexual path of homosexuality. Intellectual information about many subjects is given to children and young people, and they are put on the path of sports whose abuse miserably shortens life. Unfortunately, when the sexual energy appears with which adolescence begins, teachers as well as parents, based on a false puritanism and on stupid morals, resolve to remain criminally silent. There are criminal silences, and there exist infamous words. To keep silent about the sexual problem is a crime. To speak mistakenly about the sexual problem also constitutes another crime. If parents and teachers keep silent, the sexual perverts speak, and the victims are the inexperienced adolescents. If the adolescent cannot consult his parents or teachers, he will then consult his classmates that are possibly already deviated onto the mistaken path. The result does not take a long time to be seen, and the new adolescent following false advice gives himself up to masturbation, or he deviates onto the path of homosexuality. The vice of masturbation totally ruins the cerebral potency. It is necessary to know that there exists an intimate relation between the semen and the brain. It is necessary to cerebrize the semen. It is necessary to seminize the brain. The brain is seminized by transmuting sexual energy, sublimating it, transforming it into cerebral potency. In this way, the semen remains cerebrized at the brain seminized. The Gnostic science studies endocrinology in depth and teaches methods and systems to transmute the sexual energies, but this is a matter that does not fall within the scope of his book. If the reader wants information about Gnosticism, he should study our Gnostic books and enter our studies. Adolescents should sublimate their sexual energies, cultivating the aesthetic sense, learning about music, sculpture, paintings, making excursions to high mountains, etc. How many faces that could have been beautiful are withered? How many brains are degenerated? Everything because of lack of a warning in the appropriate moment. The vice of masturbation, in young men as well as young women, has become more common than pie. The asylums are filled with men and women that ruined their brain with the disgusting vice of masturbation. The destiny of masturbators is the mental hospital. The vice of homosexuality has the rotten roots of this decrepit and perverse race. It seems incredible that in countries such as England that claim to be refined and super-civilized, there exist cinemas where movies of a homosexual nature are freely shown. It seems incredible that it is precisely in England where efforts are already being made to officially legalize marriages of a homosexual nature. In the great metropolis of the world, there actually exist brothels and clubs of a homosexual nature. The tenebrous brotherhood of the enemies of woman nowadays have perverted organizations that shock because of their degenerated fraternity. This about the degenerated fraternity could surprise many readers, but we should not forget that in all the ages of history diverse brotherhoods of crime have always existed. The morbid fraternity of the enemies of woman is, without a doubt, a brotherhood of crime. The enemies of woman always or almost always occupy the key positions within the bureaucratic beehive. When a homosexual goes to prison, he is set free soon due to the opportune influence of key men in the fraternity of crime. If an effeminate person falls into misfortune, he receives financial help very soon from all the sinister personages of the fraternity of crime. The tenebrous members of homosexuality recognize each other because of the uniform that they display. It is shocking to know that homosexuals use a uniform, but that is the way it is. The uniform of homosexuals corresponds to every fashion that begins. The homosexuals begin every new fashion. When a fashion becomes common, then they begin another. In this way, the uniform of the fraternity of crime is always new. All the great cities of the world have nowadays millions of homosexuals. The vice of homosexuality begins its shameful march during adolescence. Many schools of teenage boys and girls are true brothels of a homosexual nature. Millions of teenage girls resolutely march down the tenebrous path of the enemies of man. Millions of adolescents of the feminine gender are homosexuals. The fraternity of crime among feminine homosexuality is as strong as the fraternity of crime among the masculine gender. It is urgent to radically abandon, in a definite way, false modesty and frankly point out to adolescents of both sexes all the sexual mysteries. Only in this way can the new generations be led onto the path of regeneration. Chapter 26. Youth. Youth is divided into two periods, each of 7 years. The first period begins at 21 years of age and concludes at 28 years of age. The second period is initiated at 28 years of age and ends at 35 years of age. The foundations of youth are found in the home, at school, and in the street. Youth brought up on the basis of fundamental education is in fact edifying and essentially dignifying. Youth brought up on false foundations is, as a logical consequence, a mistaken path. The majority of men use the first part of their life to make the rest of it miserable. Young men, because of a mistaken concept of false manhood, often fall into the arms of prostitutes. The excesses of youth are promissory notes drawn against old age, payable with very high interests in 30 years. Without fundamental education, youth become a perpetual intoxication. It is the fever of error, of liquor, and of animal passion. Everything that a man will do in his life is found in a potential state during the first 30 years of existence. Of all the great human actions which we have knowledge of, both in bygone times as well as today, the greater number of them have been initiated before 30 years of age. The man who has reached 30 years of age sometimes feels as if he came out of a great battle in which he has seen a multitude of his companions fall one after the other. At 30 years of age, men and women have already lost all their vivacity and enthusiasm, and if they fail in their first projects, they become filled with pessimism and abandon the match. The illusion of maturity follows the illusions of youth. Without fundamental education, the inheritance of old age is often desperation. Youth is fleeting. Beauty is the splendor of youth, but it is illusory, it does not last. Youth has a vivacious temperament and its judgment is weak. Rare are young people with a strong judgment and vivacious temperament. Without fundamental education, young people become passionate people. Drunkards, rascals, sarcastic, concupiscent, lustful, gluttons, covetous, envious, jealous, bullies, thieves, proud, lazy, etc. Youth is a summer sun that is soon concealed. Young people delight in squandering the vital values of youth. Old people commit the error of exploiting young people and leading them into war. Young people can transform themselves and transform the world if they orientated themselves along the path of fundamental education. In youth, we are full of illusions that only lead us to disenchantment. The ego takes advantage of the fire of youth to strengthen itself and make itself powerful. The ego wants passionate satisfactions at whatever price, even when old age be totally disastrous. Young people are only interested in surrendering to the arms of fornication, wine, and all types of pleasure. They do not want to realize that to be slaves of pleasure is typical of stupid people, but not typical of real men. No pleasure lasts long enough. The thirst for pleasure is the pain that makes the intellectual animal most despicable. The great poet of Spanish tongue, Jorge Manrique, said, "How swift does pleasure fade, when afterwards remembered, causes pain. For, in our opinion, any bygone time was better." Aristotle, speaking about pleasure, said, when it has to do with judging pleasure, we men are not impartial judges. The intellectual animal enjoys justifying pleasure. Frederick the Great had no inconvenience to emphatically affirm, pleasure is the most real good of this life. The most unbearable pain is that produced by the prolongation of the most intense pleasure. Young madcaps abound like weeds. The madcap ego always justifies pleasure. The chronic madcap abhors marriage or prefers to postpone it. It is a serious thing to postpone marriage with the pretext of enjoying all the pleasures of earth. It is absurd to finish with the vitality of youth and then get married. The victims of such stupidity are the children. Many men get married because they are tired. Many women get married out of curiosity, and the result of such absurdities is always deception. Every wise man truly loves with all his heart the woman he has chosen. We should always get married in our youth if we really do not want to have a miserable old age. There is a time for everything in life. It is normal for a young person to get married, but for an old person to get married is stupidity. Young people should get married and know how to form their home. We should never forget that the monster of jealousy destroys homes. Solomon said, "Jealousy is cruel like a tomb, its coals are coals of fire." The race of intellectual animals is jealous lyle dogs. Jealousy is totally animal-like. The man that is jealous of his wife does not know who he is dealing with. It is better not to be jealous of her so that we know what type of wife we have. The poisonous screaming of a jealous woman becomes more fatal than the fangs of a rabid dog. It is false to say that where there is jealousy, there is love. Jealousy is never born from love. Love and jealousy are incompatible. The origin of jealousy is found in fear. The ego justifies jealousy with reasons of many types. The ego fears losing the loved one. Whoever wants to truly dissolve the ego should always be willing to lose whatever is loved most. In practice, we have been able to prove for ourselves, after many years of observation, that every libertine bachelor becomes a jealous husband. Every man has been terribly fornicating. Man and woman should be united voluntarily out of love and not out of fear and jealousy. Before the great law, a man should answer for his behavior and a woman for hers. A husband cannot answer for the behavior of his wife, nor can the wife answer for the behavior of her husband. Let each person answer for her own behavior and let jealousy be dissolved. The basic problem of youth is marriage. The coquettish girl with several boyfriends remains single because all the boys become disillusioned with her. It is necessary that young girls know how to keep their boyfriend if they truly want to get married. It is necessary not to confuse love with passion. Young men and women do not know how to distinguish between love and passion. It is urgent to know that passion is a poison that fools the mind and heart. Every impassioned man and every impassioned woman could even swear with tears of blood that they are truly in love. After the animal-like passion has been satisfied, the castle of dreams crumbles to the ground. The failure of so many marriages is due to their getting married out of animal-like passion and not out of love. The most serious step that we take during youth is marriage, and as schools, colleges, and universities, young men and women should be prepared for this important step. It is unfortunate that many young men and women get married out of a financial interest or more social conveniences. When marriage is carried out due to animal-like passion, social conveniences, or financial interest, the result is failure. Many are the couples that fail in marriage because of incompatibility of characters. The woman that marries a jealous, angry, furious young man will become the victim of an executioner. The young man who marries a jealous, furious, angry woman clearly lives his life in a hell. For there to be true love between two beings, it is urgent for animal-like passion not to exist. It is indispensable to dissolve the ego of jealousy. It is necessary to disintegrate anger. Absolute unselfishness is vital. The ego harms homes, the myself destroys harmony. If young men and women study our fundamental education and propose to dissolve the ego, it is clear from all angles that they will be able to find the path of perfect marriage. Only by dissolving the ego can there be true happiness in homes. We prescribe to young men and women who want to be happy in marriage to study in depth our fundamental education and to dissolve the ego. Many parents are frightfully jealous of their daughters and do not want them to have a boyfriend. Such action is absurd 100% because girls need to have a boyfriend and get married. The result of such lack of understanding is secret boyfriends and the ever-present danger of falling into the arms of a seductive suitor. Girls should always have the freedom to have a boyfriend. However, due to their not having dissolved the ego, it is convenient not to leave them alone with the boyfriend. Young men and women should have the freedom to have parties at home. Healthy pastimes do not harm anyone, and youth needs to have pastimes. What harms youth is alcohol, cigarettes, fornication, orgies, licentiousness, bars, cabarets, etc. Family parties, decent dances, good music, trips to the countryside, etc. cannot harm anyone. The mind damages love. Many young men have lost the opportunity of getting married to magnificent women due to financial fears, to memories of yesterday and worries about tomorrow. Fear of life, hunger and misery and vain projects of the mind become a fundamental course for every nuptial postponement. Many are the young men who decide not to get married until they possess a specific amount of money, their own house, the latest car and hundreds of gadgets more, as if all that was happiness. Unfortunately, that type of men lose beautiful marriage opportunities because of fear of life, of death, of what others will say, etc. Such types of men remain single all their life, or they get married too late when they do not have enough time to form their family and educate their children. Really, everything that a man needs to support his wife and children is to have a profession or a humble trade, that is all. Many young women remain single because of choosing a husband. Calculating, egotistical, mercenary women remain single or fail completely in marriage. It is necessary that girls understand that every man becomes disillusioned with a mercenary, calculating, egotistical woman. Some young women desirous of getting a husband make themselves up in an exaggerated way. They pluck their eyebrows, curl their hair, put on winds and false eyelashes. These women do not understand male psychology. Man, by nature, abhors makeup dolls and admires totally natural beauty and the ingenuous smile. A man wants to see in a woman sincerity, simplicity, true, disinterested love, and the ingenuity of nature. Girls who want to get married need to understand in depth the psychology of the male sex. Love is the summon of wisdom. Love nourishes itself with love. The eternal youth is love. Chapter 27. Mature age. Mature age begins at 35 years of age and ends at 56 years of age. A man of mature age should know how to govern his home and how to orientate his children. In formal life, every man of mature age is head of a family. The man who has not set up his home and made his fortune during his youth and mature age will no longer form it. He is, as a matter of fact, a failure. Those who attempt to set up a home and make their fortune during old age are truly worthy of pity. The ego of covetousness goes to extremes and wants to accumulate riches. A human being needs bread, clothing, and shelter. It is necessary to have bread, our own house, dresses, suits, coats to cover the body, but a human being does not need to accumulate enormous sums of money in order to live. We do not defend wealth nor misery. Both extremes are to be condemned. There are many who wallow in the mud of misery, and there are also many who wallow in the mud of wealth. It is necessary to possess a modest fortune, that is to say, a beautiful house with lovely gardens, a sure source of income, always be well dressed, and not to suffer hunger. This is normal for every human being. Misery, hunger, illness, and ignorance should never exist in any country that boasts of being cultured and civilized. Democracy still does not exist, but we need to create it. While there exists a single person without bread, clothing, or shelter, democracy is practically nothing but a beautiful ideal. Parents should be understanding, intelligent, and never be wine drinkers, gluttons, drunkards, tyrants, etc. Every mature man knows through his own experience that children imitate his example, and if the latter is mistaken, it will indicate absurd paths to his descendants. It is truly stupid for a mature man to have several women and live in drinking sprees, banquets, orgies, etc. The responsibility of the entire family falls on a mature man, and it is clear that, if he treads on mistaken paths, he will bring more disorder to the world, more confusion, more bitterness. A father and mother should understand the difference between the sexes. It is necessary for fathers and mothers to strive with all their heart to promote a vital change in every curriculum in schools. A woman should be prepared to form the school desk for the sublime mission that corresponds to her as mother and as wife. It is necessary for parents as well as teachers of schools, colleges, and universities to worry more about bringing to a woman the femininity that corresponds to her. It is stupid to militarize women, to force them to march with drums and flags through the streets of cities as if they were males. A woman should be fully feminine and a man should be fully masculine. The intermediate sex, homosexuality, is the product of degeneration and savagery. Girls who dedicate themselves to long and difficult studies become old and no one marries them. Normally a woman should be dedicated to the home life, but due to the cruelty of this age in which we live, a woman needs to work to eat and live. In a truly cultured and civilized society, a woman does not need to work outside her home in order to live. This thing about working outside the home is cruelty of the worst type. The generated man of today has created a false order of things and has made woman lose her femininity. He has taken her out of the house and made her a slave. A woman transformed into a tomboy with the intellect of a man, smoking cigarettes and reading the newspaper, half naked with skirt riding above her knees of playing cards, is the result of degenerated men of this age, the social blemish of a civilization which is dying. A woman transformed into a modern spy, a drug-addicted doctor, a sports champion woman, an alcoholic, a denaturalized woman who denies breastfeeding her children so that she does not lose her beauty, is an execrable symptom of a false civilization. The time has arrived to organize the army of world salvation with men and women of goodwill who are truly willing to struggle against the false order of things. The time has arrived to establish in the world a new civilization, a new culture. A woman is the fundamental stone of the home, and, if this stone is badly carved, full of ridges and deformations of all types, the result of social life will be a catastrophe. A militarized college of men is absurd, but a militarized college of women, besides being absurd, becomes frightfully ridiculous. It is disgusting to see future wives, future mothers that will carry a child in their bosom, marching like men through the highways of a city. This not only indicates loss of femininity in the gender, but also points out the sore spot, indicating the loss of masculinity in man. A man, a true man, a fully masculine man, can never accept a militarized parade of women. The masculine scruple, the psychological idiosyncrasy of the male, the mind of man, feels truly disgusted at his type of spectacle that demonstrates human degeneration up to the hilt. We need woman to return home, to her femininity, to her natural beauty, to her primitive ingenuity and her true simplicity. We need to do away with this entire order of things and establish upon the face of the earth a new civilization and a new culture. Parents and educators should know how to bring up new generations with true wisdom and love. Male children should not only receive intellectual information and learn a trade or graduate with a professional degree, it is necessary that men get to know a sense of responsibility and walk along the path of righteousness. Upon the shoulders of a mature man weighs the responsibility of a wife, sons, and daughters. A mature man with a high sense of responsibility, chaste, sober, temperate, virtuous, etc., is respected by his family and by all people. A mature man who scandalizes people with his adulteries, fornications, quarrels, injustices of all types, becomes repugnant to all people and not only causes himself pain but also embitters his relatives and brings pain and confusion to the whole world. It is necessary for a mature man to know how to live correctly in this age. It is urgent that a mature man understand that youth has already passed away. It is ridiculous to want to repeat in maturity the same dramas and scenes of youth. Each period of life has its beauty and one has to know how to live it. A mature man should work with extreme intensity before old age arrives, just as the ant acts in a foreseeable way, carrying leaves to its ant hill before the hard winter arrives. In the same way, a mature man should act with swiftness and foresight. Many young men miserably waste all their vital values, and when mature age arrives they find themselves ugly, horrible, miserable, and failures. It is truly ridiculous to see many mature men repeating the madcap actions of youth without realizing that they are now horrible and that youth has left them. One of the greatest calamities of this agonizing civilization is the vice of alcohol. In youth, many people surrender to the vice of drinking, and when mature age arrives they have not formed a home, they have not made a fortune, they do not have a lucrative profession, they live from bar to bar begging liquor, frightfully horrible, disgusting, miserable people. Parents and teachers should pay special attention to young people, honestly, guiding them with the healthy purpose of making a better world. Chapter 28. Old Age. In the first 40 years of life a book is given to us, and in the following 30 years a commentary. At 20 years of age a man is a peacock, at 30 a lion, at 40 a camel, at 50 a serpent, at 60 a dog, at 70 a monkey, and at 80 only a voice and a shadow. Time reveals all things. It is a very interesting charlatan he who speaks for himself even when nothing is being asked of him. Nothing is made by the hand of the poor intellectual animal, falsely called man, that sooner or later time does not destroy. Fugit irreparable tempus, the time that flees cannot be restored. Time brings to public light everything that is now hidden, and covers and hides everything that, at this moment, shines with splendor. Old age is like love, it cannot be hidden even when it disguises itself with the garb of youth. Old age abates the pride of men and humiliates them, but one thing is to be humble and another to fall humiliated. When death approaches, the disillusioned old men of life find that old age is no longer a burden. All men harbor the hope of living a long life and attaining old age. However, old age frightens us. Old age begins at 56 years of age and then processes itself in septenary periods that lead us to decrepitude and death. The greatest tragedy of old people rests not on the very fact of being old, but in the foolishness of not wanting to recognize that they are old, and in the stupidity of believing oneself young as if old age was a crime. The best thing that old age has is that one finds oneself very close to the goal. The psychological ego, the myself, does not become better with years and experience. It complicates itself, it becomes more difficult, more laborious. That is why the common saying goes, temper and character all the way to the tome. The psychological ego of difficult old people consoles itself, giving beautiful advice due to its incapacity to set ugly examples. Old people know very well that old age is a very terrible tyrant that prohibits them, under penalty of death, to enjoy the pleasures of crazy youth, and they prefer to console themselves giving beautiful advice. The ego hides the ego. It hides a part of itself, and it hides what is not suitable for it. Everything is labeled with sublime phrases and beautiful advice. It is completely demonstrated by observation and experience that when vices abandon us, we like to think that we were the ones that abandoned them. The heart of the intellectual animal does not become better with years, but worse. It always petrifies, and if in youth we were covetous, liars, wrathful, then in old age we will be even more so. Old people live in the past. Old people are the result of many yesterdays. The aged totally ignores the moment in which he lives. Old people are accumulated memory. The only way of reaching perfect old age is by dissolving the psychological ego. When we learn to live from moment to moment, we arrive at sublime old age. Old age has a great sense of peace and freedom for those who have dissolved the ego. When passions have died in a radical, total, and definitive way, one becomes free from not just one master, but many. It is very difficult to find innocent aged persons in life who no longer possess even the residues of the ego. That type of aged person is infinitely happy and lives from instant to instant. A man or woman, gray-haired in wisdom, and aged person in knowledge, a lord of love becomes, as a matter of fact, the lighthouse that wisely guides the current of innumerable centuries. In the world there have existed and actually exist some aged masters that do not even have the last residues of the ego. These Gnostic arhats are as exotic and divine as a lotus flower. A venerable old master who has dissolved the pluralized ego in a radical and definitive way is the perfect expression of perfect wisdom, of divine love and sublime power. An old master who no longer has an ego is, as a matter of fact, the full manifestation of the divine being. These sublime aged, these Gnostic arhat have illuminated the world from ancient times. Let us remember Buddha, Moses, Hermes, Ramakrishna, Daniel, the Holy Lama, etc. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities, and parents should teach the new generations to respect and venerate the aged. That which has no name, that which is divine, that which is real has three aspects: wisdom, love, word. The divine as Father is cosmic wisdom, like Mother is infinite love, as Son is the Word. In the father of a family is found the symbol of wisdom. In the mother of a home is found love. Children symbolize the Word. An aged father deserves all the support of his children. A father that is now old cannot work, and it is just that the children maintain his and respect him. An adorable mother that is now aged cannot work, and therefore it is necessary that the sons and daughters take care of her and love her and make a religion out of this love. Whoever does not know how to love his father, whoever does not know how to adore his mother marches on the left-handed path, on the path of error. Children do not have a right to judge their parents. Nobody is perfect in this world, and those of us who do not have specific defects in one direction have them in another. All of us were out with the same scissors. Some people underestimate paternal love, others even laugh at paternal love. Whoever conducts himself like this in life has not even entered the path which leads to that which has no name. An ungrateful son who abhors his father and forgets his mother is really a true pervert that abhors everything that is divine. The revolution of our conscience does not mean ungratefulness, to forget the father, to underestimate the adorable mother. The revolution of conscience is wisdom, love, and perfect power. In the father is found the symbol of wisdom, and in the mother is found the living source of love without whose purest essence it is really impossible to achieve the highest intimate fulfillments. Chapter 29. Death. It is urgent to understand in depth and in all the regions of the mind what death in itself really is. It is only in this way that it is possible to understand fully what immortality is. To see a human body of a loved one put inside a coffin does not mean to have understood the mystery of death. Truth is unknown from moment to moment. The truth about death cannot be an exception. The ego always wants, as is natural, an insurance of death, a supplementary guarantee, some authority that will take care of assuring us good position and any type of immortality beyond the terrifying grave. The myself does not have many desires to die. The ego wants to continue. The ego is very afraid of death. Truth is not a matter of believing or doubting. Truth has nothing to do with belief or skepticism. Truth is not a matter of ideas, theories, opinions, concepts, preconceptions, suppositions, prejudices, affirmations, negotiations, etc. The truth about the mystery of death is not an exception. The truth about the mystery of death can only be known through direct experience. It is impossible to communicate the real experience of death to someone who does not know it. Any poet can write beautiful books on love, but it is impossible to communicate the truth about love to people who have never experienced it. In a similar way, we say that it is impossible to communicate the truth about death to people who have not lived it. Whoever wants to know the truth about death should investigate, experience for himself, search as is proper. It is only in this way that we can discover the profound meaning of death. Observation and the experience of many years have allowed us to understand that people are not really interested in understanding the profound meaning of death. The only thing that really interests people is to continue in the beyond, and that is all. Many people want to continue through their material goods, prestige, family, beliefs, ideas, children, etc., and when they understand that any type of psychological continuity is in vain, transitory, ephemeral, unstable, then they feel without guarantees, unsure, they are terrified, horrified, they become filled with infinite terror. The wretched do not want to understand that everything that continues evolves in time. The wretched do not want to understand that everything that continues fades with time. The wretched do not want to understand that everything that continues becomes mechanical, routine, boring. It is urgent, necessary, indispensable to make ourselves fully conscious of the deep meaning of death. It is only in this way that the fear of ceasing to exist will disappear. Carefully observing humanity, we can verity that the mind is always found bottled up in the known, and it wants that which is known to continue beyond the grave. The mind bottled up in the known can never experience the unknown, what is real, what is true. Only by breaking the bottle of time through correct meditation can we experience the eternal, the atemporal, the real. Those who desire to continue fear death. Their beliefs and theories only serve them as narcotics. Death in itself is not terrifying. It is something lovely, sublime, ineffable, but the mind bottled up in the known only moves inside the vicious circle that goes from credulity to skepticism. When we really make ourselves fully conscious of the deep and profound meaning of death, then we discover for ourselves, through direct experience, that life and death constitute an integral, unitotal whole. Death is the depository of life. The path of life is formed with the tracks of the hooves of death. Life is defined energy, and defining energy. From birth until death there flows within the human organism different types of energy. The only type of energy that the human organism cannot resist is the ray of death. This ray has an excessively elevated electric voltage. The human organism cannot resist such a voltage. Just as a ray can tear a tree to pieces, in the same way, the ray of death, on flowing through the human organism, inevitably destroys it. The ray of death connects the phenomenon of death with the phenomenon of birth. The ray of death originates very intimate electric tensions and a certain keynote which has a determinate power of combining the genes inside a fertilized egg. The ray of death reduces the human organism to its fundamental elements. The energetic ego, unfortunately, continues in our descendants. That which is the truth about death, that which is the interval between death and conceptions, is something that does not belong to time and that we can experience only through the science of meditation. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities should teach their students the path which leads to the experience of what is real and of what is true. Chapter 30. Experience of Reality. On the solemn threshold of the temple at Delphi was found a sacred inscription carved out on a living stone which read as follows: Nos te ipsum, know thyself and you will know the universe and its gods. The transcendental science of meditation has as its fundamental cornerstone this sacred saying of the ancient Greek hierophants. If we truly and sincerely want to establish the basis for correct meditation, it is necessary to understand ourselves in all the levels of the mind. To establish the correct basis for meditation means to be free of ambition, egotism, fear, hate, greed for psychic powers, yearning for results, etc. It is clear by any reckoning and beyond all doubt that after establishing the fundamental cornerstone of meditation, the mind stays still and in profound and imposing silence. From the strictly logical point of view, it is absurd to want to experience reality without knowing ourselves. It is urgent to understand fully in all areas of the mind each desire, each memory, each psychological defect, etc. It is clear by any reckoning that during the practice of meditation, one can see on the screen of the mind the sinister procession of all the psychological defects which characterize us, all our happy and sad moments, countless memories, multiple impulses that come from the outside world and from the interior world, desires of all types, passions of all kinds, old resentments, hatred, etc. He who truly wants to establish in his mind the fundamental cornerstone of meditation should pay full attention to the positive and negative values of our understanding and understand them in an integral way, not merely on the intellectual level, but also in all subconscious, infraconscious, and unconscious regions of the mind. We should never forget that the mind has many levels. An in-depth study of all these values means, as a matter of fact, knowledge of oneself. Any movie on the mind screen has a beginning and an end. When the parade of forms, desires, passions, ambitions, memories, etc. ends, then the mind becomes still and in profound silence, empty of all kinds of thoughts. Today, students of psychology need to experience the illuminating void. The eruption of the void within our own minds allows us to experience, feel, and live an element that transforms. That element is reality. Let us distinguish between a mind that is still and a mind that has been stilled violently. Let us distinguish between a mind that is in silence and one that has been forcibly silenced. In the light of any logical deduction, we must understand that when the mind is violently calmed, deep down and in other levels, it is not still and it struggles to be free. From the analytical point of view, we have to understand that when the mind is forcibly silenced, deep down it is not silenced. It screams and becomes terribly desperate. The true stillness and natural and spontaneous silence of the mind comes to us as a grace, as good fortune, when the intimate movie of our existence on the wonderful screen of the intellect ends. Only when the mind is naturally and spontaneously still, only when the mind is in delicious silence does the eruption of the illuminating void occur. The void is not easy to explain. It is not definable or describable. Any concept that we might utter about it could fail on the principal point. The void cannot be described or expressed in words. This is due to the human language having been created mainly to designate existing objects, thoughts, and feelings. It is not adequate for expressing, in a clear and specific way, non-existing objects, phenomena, and feelings. To try to discuss the void within the limits of a language, limited by the forms of existence, is really beyond doubt, foolish and absolutely incorrect. The void is the no existence and existence is not the void. The form does not differ from the void, and the void does not differ from the form. The form is the void and the void is the form. It is due to the void that things exist. The void and existence complement each other and do not oppose each other. The void and existence merge and embrace each other. When beings of normal sensitivity see an object, they see only the existent aspect, they do not see the void aspect. Every enlightened being can simultaneously see the existent and void aspect of anything. The void is simply a term that denotes the non-substantial and the non-personal nature of all beings and is a sign indicating the state of total detachment and freedom. Lao Tse Tao Te King. School, college, and university teachers should make an in-depth study of our revolutionary psychology and then teach their students the path that lead to the experience of reality. It is only possible to arrive at the experience of reality when all thought has stopped. The eruption of the void allows us to experience the bright light of pure reality. That knowledge, present in reality of the void, without characteristics or color, the void of nature is the true reality, universal kindness. Your intelligence whose true nature is the void, which should not be seen as the void of nothing, But as your very intelligence without shackles, brilliant, universal and happy, is the conscience, the universal wise Buddha. Your own void conscience and brilliant and joyful intelligence are inseparable. Its union is the Dharmakaya, the state of perfect illumination. Your own brilliant conscience, void and inseparable from the great body of splendor, does not have a birth or death, and is the immutable light, Amitabha Buddha. This knowledge is enough. To recognize the void of your own intelligence as the state of Buddha and consider it as your own conscience, is to continue on the divine spirit of Buddha. Keep your intellect calm without being distracted during meditation, forget that. You are in meditation. Do not think that you are meditation because when one thinks that he is meditating, this thought is enough to disturb the meditation. Your mind should become empty in order to experience what is real. Chapter 31. Revolutionary Psychology. School, college, and university teachers should profoundly study the revolutionary psychology that the international Gnostic movement teaches. The psychology of revolution in progress is radically different to anything known by this name before. Undoubtedly, we can say, without fear of being mistaken, that in the course of the centuries that have preceded us, since the profound night of all ages, never has psychology fallen so low as it actually is in this age of rebels without a cause and the rockers. To make matters worse, the retarded and reactionary psychology of these modern times has lost its sense of being and every direct contact with its true origin. In these times of sexual degeneration and total deterioration of the mind, not only is it impossible to accurately define the term psychology, but also the fundamental subject of psychology are truly unknown. Those who mistakenly suppose that psychology is the latest contemporary science are really confused because psychology is a very ancient science which has its origins in the old schools of archaic mysteries. To the snob, the cunning ultramodern type and socially retarded, it is impossible to define that which is known as psychology because with the exception of this contemporary age, it is obvious that psychology never existed under its own name. Due to certain reasons, it was always suspected of subversive tendencies of religious or political nature, and because of this, it was forced to disguise itself with multifarious trappings. Since ancient times, psychology has always played its role, intelligently disguised by trappings of philosophy in different scenes in the drama of life. Since the terrifying night of centuries on the banks of the Ganges, in the sacred India of the Vedas, there have existed forms of yoga that come to be, deep down, pure experimental psychology. The 7 types of yoga have always been described as methods, procedures, or philosophical systems. In the Arab world, the sacred teachings of the Sufis, partly metaphysical and partly religious, are in fact of a purely psychological nature. In old Europe, rotten through and through with so many wars, racial, religious and political prejudices, etc., right up to the end of the last century, psychology disguised itself with the trappings of philosophy in order to go unnoticed. Philosophy, in spite of all its divisions and subdivisions such as logic, the theory of knowledge, ethics, aesthetics, etc., is without a doubt evident self-reflection, mystic cognition of the being, fundamental perfection of an awakened conscience. The error of many philosophical schools consists in having considered psychology as something inferior to philosophy, as something related only to the lowest and even trivial aspects of human nature. A comparative study of religions permits us to come at the logical conclusion that the science of psychology has always been intimately associated with all religious principles. Any comparative study of religions demonstrates us that within most orthodox sacred literature of various countries and at different periods there are wonderful treasures of psychological science. In-depth investigations in the field of Gnosticism allows us to find that wonderful compilation of several Gnostic authors known as Philokalia. It comes from the earliest times of Christianity and is still used in our time in the Oriental Church, especially for the instruction of monks. Undoubtedly, and without any fear of deceit, we can emphatically affirm that Philokalia is essentially pure experimental psychology. In the ancient schools of mystery of Greece, Egypt, Rome, India, Persia, Mexico, Peru, Assyria, Chaldea, etc., psychology has always been related to philosophy, to real objective art, to science and religion. In ancient times, psychology was cleverly hidden behind the graceful forms of sacred dancers, or behind the enigma of strange hieroglyphs or beautiful sculptures, poetry or tragedy, and even behind the delicious music of temples. Before science, philosophy, the arts, and religion parted to live independent lives, psychology was the sovereign ruler of all the ancient schools of temples. When the school initiates closed their door due to the Kali Yuga or Dark Age in which we still live, psychology survived in the symbolism of several esoteric and pseudo-esoteric schools of the modern world, and especially in Gnostic esotericism. Profound analysis and in-depth investigation allow us to understand very clearly that the different systems and psychological doctrines that existed in the past and that exist today can be divided into two categories. First, the doctrines that are just as many intellectuals suppose them to be. Modern psychology belongs, in fact, to this category. Second, the doctrines that study man forms the point of view of the revolution of conscience. The latter are truly the original and most ancient doctrines, only they allow us to understand the living origins of psychology and their profound meaning. When all of us have understood in an integral way and in all the levels of the mind how important the study of man is from the new point of view of the revolution of conscience, then we will understand that psychology is the study of principles, laws, and facts intimately related to the definitive and radical transformation of the individual. It is imperative that school, college, and university teachers understand in an integral way the critical times in which we live and the catastrophic state of psychological disorientation in which the new generation finds itself. It is necessary to direct the new wave to the path of the revolution of conscience, and this is only possible through the revolutionary psychology of fundamental education. Chapter 32. Psychological Rebellion. Those who have dedicated themselves to traveling through all the countries of the world with the purpose of studying in detail all the human races have been able to prove to themselves that the nature of this poor intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, is always the same, whether it be in old Europe or Africa, tired of so much slavery, in the sacred country of the Vedas, in the West Indies, in Austria, or in China. This fact, this shocking reality which surprises every studious man, can be especially verified if the traveler visits schools, colleges, and universities. We have arrived at the age of mass production. Now everything is produced on assembly lines and on a grand scale, mass-produced planes, cars, luxury items, etc. Even though it seems ridiculous, it is true that training schools, universities, etc., have also become intellectual factories of mass production. In these times of mass production, the only objective in life is to find economic security. People are afraid of everything and look for security. Independent thought in these times of mass production is almost impossible, because the modern type of education is based on mere convenience. The new age lives very satisfied with this intellectual mediocrity. If someone wants to be different, distinct from the others, the whole world disqualifies him, the whole world criticizes him, he is thought out, he is denied jobs, etc. The desire of obtaining money to live and enjoy oneself, the urgency of being successful in life, the search for economical security, the desire of buying many things to show off in from of others, etc., stops pure, natural, and spontaneous thought. It has verified totally that fear blunts the mind and hardens the heart. In these times of so much fear and search for security, people hide in their caves, in their burrows, in their corners, in the place where they believe that they can have most security, least problems, and they do not want to come out of there. They are terrified of life, they are afraid of new adventures, new experiences, etc. This must talked about modern education is based on fear and the search for security. People are frightened, they are afraid even of their own shadow. People are terrified of everything. They fear coming out of old established norms, being different from other people, thinking in a revolutionary way, breaking with all prejudices of a decadent society, etc. Fortunately, there live in the world a few sincere and understanding people who truly want to examine all the problems of the mind profoundly. However, in the greater majority of us, the spirit of nonconformity and rebellion does not even exist. There exist two types of rebellion which are already duly classified. First, violent psychological rebellion. Second, profound psychological rebellion of intelligence. The first type of rebellion is reactionary, conservative, and retardate. The second type of rebellion is revolutionary. In the first type of psychological rebellion, we find the reformer who mends old suits and repairs the walls of old buildings so that they will not crumble. He is the regressive type, the revolutionary of blood and liquor, the leader of military uprisings and coups. He is the man with a shotgun on his shoulder, the dictator who enjoys taking all those who do not accept these whims and theories to the firing squad. In the second type of psychological rebellion, we find Buddha, Jesus, Hermes, the transformer, the intelligent rebel, the intuitive, great paladins of the revolution of conscience. Those who only educate themselves with the absurd purpose of scaling magnificent positions within the bureaucratic beehive, of ascending, of climbing to the top of the ladder and making themselves heard. They lack true depth, they are stupid by nature, superficial, empty, 100% rascals. It has already been proven up to the hilt that when true integration of thought and feelings does not exist in a human being, even when we have received a great education, life becomes incomplete, contradictory, boring, and tormenting because of innumerable fears of all types. Undoubtedly, and without fear of making a mistake, we can affirm emphatically that without integral education, life becomes damaging, useless, and harmful. The intellectual animal has an internal ego which is unfortunately made up of separate entities that are fortified with mistaken education. The pluralized ego that each of us carry within is the fundamental cause of all our complexes and contradictions. Fundamental education should teach the new generations our psychological didactic for the dissolution of the ego. Only by dissolving the various entities that which on the whole constitute the ego, can we establish in ourselves a permanent center of individual conscience, then we shall be integral. While there exists inside each of us the pluralized ego, not only do we embitter our life for ourselves, but we also embitter the lives of others. What is the use of studying law and become lawyers if we perpetuate fights? What is the use of accumulating much knowledge in our mind if we continue to be confused? What is the use of technical and industrial skills if we use them for the destruction of our fellow men? It is useless to receive instruction, to attend classes, to study if in the process of daily living we are miserably destroying one another. The aim of education should not be to only produce each year new job searchers, new types of rascals, new bores that do not even know how to respect their neighbor's religion, etc. The true objective of fundamental education should be to create true, integrated men and women, and therefore, conscious and intelligent men and women. Unfortunately, teachers of schools, colleges, and universities think of everything, but think least of all in awakening the integral intelligence of those whom they are educating. Any person can covet and acquire titles, medals, diplomas, and even become very efficient in the mechanistic field of life, but this does not mean being intelligent. Intelligence can never be mere mechanical functionalism. Intelligence can never be the result of simple book knowledge. Intelligence is not the capacity of reacting automatically with sparkling words to any challenge. Intelligence is not mere verbalization of memory. Intelligence is the capacity of directly receiving the essence, the real, what truly is. Fundamental education is the science which allows us to awaken this capacity in ourselves and in others. Fundamental education helps each individual to discover the true values that emerge as a result of profound investigation and understanding of oneself. When self-knowledge does not exist within us, then self-expression becomes egotistical and destructive self-affirmation. Fundamental education is only concerned with the awakening of each individual, the capacity of understanding oneself in all the areas of the mind, and not simply to surrender it to the complacency of the mistaken self-expression of the pluralized ego. Chapter 33. Evolution, Involution, Revolution. In practice, we have been able to verity that in materialistic schools as well as in spiritualist schools, people are completely bottled up in the dogma of evolution. Modern opinions on the origin of man and his past evolution are deep down cheap sophistry. They do not resist a profound critical study. In spite of all of Darwin's theories being accepted as truths on blind faith by Karl Marx and his much-referred dialectic materialism, modern scientists know nothing about the origins of man. They have proved nothing. They have experienced nothing directly and lack accurate, specific, and precise proofs on human evolution. On the contrary, if we take human history, say the last 20 or 30,000 years BC, we will find precise proofs, unmistakable signs of a superior type of man, incomprehensible to modern people and whose presence can be demonstrated through multiple testimonies, ancient hieroglyphs, ancient pyramids, exotic monoliths, mysterious papyri, and diverse, ancient monuments. As for prehistoric man, those strange and mysterious creatures of an aspect so similar to the intellectual animal and nevertheless so different, so mysterious, and whose illustrious bones are found deeply hidden sometimes in archaic deposits of the glacial or pre-glacial period, modern scientists know nothing precise about them through direct experience. Gnostic science teaches that the rational animal, as we know him, is not a perfect being. He is not yet a man in the complete sense of the word. Nature developed him to a certain point and then abandoned him, leaving him in complete freedom to continue his development or lose all his possibilities and degenerate. The laws of evolution and those of involution are the mechanical axis of all nature and have nothing to do with the intimate self-realization of the being. Inside the intellectual animal there exists tremendous possibilities that can be developed or lost. It is not a law that these possibilities develop themselves. Evolutive mechanics cannot develop them. The development of such latent possibilities is only possible in well-defined conditions, and this demands tremendous individual super efforts and efficient help on the part of those masters who have already done the work in the past. Whoever wants to develop all his latent possibilities to become a man should enter the path of the revolution of conscience. The intellectual animal is a grain, a seed. From that seed the tree of life can be born, the true man. That man whom Diogenes rare every time. The revolution of conscience has three perfectly defined factors: first, death; second, birth; third, sacrifice for humanity. The order of the factors does not alter the product. To die is a matter of revolutionary ethics and dissolution of the psychological ego. To be born is a matter of sexual transmutation. This matter corresponds to transcendental sexology. Whoever wants to study this theme should write to us and get to know our Gnostic books. Sacrifice for humanity is universal conscious charity. If we do not want the revolution of conscience, if we do not make tremendous super efforts to develop the latent possibilities that will take us to intimate self-realization, it is clear that the said possibilities will never develop. Those who achieve self-realization, those who are saved, are very rare, and there does not exist injustice in that, because why should the poor intellectual animal have what it does not want? A radical, total, and final change is needed, but not all the beings want that change. They do not desire it, they do not know about it, and they are told about it, but they do not understand, they are not interested. Why should they be forcibly given something that they do not want? The truth is that before the individual acquires new faculties or new powers that he does not even remotely know about and which he still does not possess, he should acquire faculties and powers that he mistakenly thinks he has, but in reality, he does not have. Chapter 34. The Integral Individual. Fundamental education in its true sense is the profound understanding of oneself. All the laws of nature are found within each individual. Whoever wants to get to know all the marvels of nature should study them within himself. False education is only concerned with enriching the intellect, and that anyone can do. It is obvious that with money anyone can have the luxury of buying books. We do not pronounce ourselves against intellectual culture. We only pronounce ourselves against unhinged, mentally accumulative eagerness. False intellectual education only offers subtle ways out to run away from oneself. Every erudite man, every intellectual addict always has marvelous evasions available that allow him to run away from himself. Rascals result from intellectualism without spirituality, and these have led humanity to chaos and destruction. Technology can never enable us to know ourselves in an integral, unitotal way. Parents send their children to school, college and university or polytechnic, etc., for them to learn a skill so that they may have some profession, for them to be able to finally earn a living. It is obvious that we need to know a skill to have a profession, but that is secondary. What is fundamental, what is primary, is to know ourselves, to know who we are, where we come from, where we are going, what the objective of our existence is. In life there is everything: happiness, sadness, love, passion, joy, pain, beauty, ugliness, etc. And when we know how to live life intensely, when we understand it on all the levels of the mind, we find our place in society. We create our own skill, our particular way of living, but the contrary is false 100%. A skill by itself can never originate an in-depth understanding, a true understanding. Today's education has been a complete failure because it gives exaggerated importance to skills, to professions, and obviously those underlining skills. Transform man into a mechanical robot. It destroys his best possibilities. To cultivate capacity and efficiency without the understanding of life, without knowledge of oneself, without a direct perception of the process of the ego, without a thorough study of the proper way of thinking, feeling, desiring and acting, will only serve to increase our own cruelty and selfishness, those psychological factors that produce war, hunger, misery, and pain. Development of skills alone has produced mechanics, scientists, technologists, atomic physicists, dissectors of poor animals, inventors of destructive arms, etc. The only thing that all those professionals, all those inventors of atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs, all those dissectors that torture nature's creatures, all those rascals are really only good for is war and destruction. Those rascals do not know anything. They do not understand anything about the total process of life in all its infinite manifestations. General technological progress, transport systems, calculating machines, electric lighting, lifts inside buildings, electric brains of all types, etc., solve thousands of problems that process themselves on a superficial level of existence, but it introduces in the individual and in society multitudes of broader and more profound problems. To live exclusively on the superficial level without taking into account the different areas and more profound regions of the mind means, as a matter of fact, to attract upon ourselves and our children misery, tears, and desperation. The greatest need, the most urgent problem of each individual is to understand life in its integral, unitotal way, because it is only in this way that we are in a position of satisfactorily solving all our particular intimate problems. Technological knowledge by itself can never solve all our psychological problems, all our profound complexes. If we want to be true men and women, integral individuals, we should psychologically explore ourselves. We should profoundly know ourselves in all the areas of thought, because technology, without a doubt, becomes a destructive instrument when we do not truly understand the entire process of existence, when we do not know ourselves in an integral way. If the intellectual animal truly loved, if he understood the entire process of life, he would never have committed the crime of splitting the atom. Our technological process is fantastic, but it has only managed to increase our aggressive power to destroy one another. Terror, hunger, ignorance, and illness reign everywhere. No profession, no technology can ever give us that which is called plenitude, true happiness. Each person in life suffers intensely in his trade, in his profession, in his routine way of living, and things and occupations become instruments of envy, murmuring, hate, bitterness. The world of doctors, the world of artists, of engineers, of lawyers, etc., each of these worlds are full of pain, murmuring, competition, envy, etc. Without the understanding of ourselves, a mere occupation, skill, or profession leads us to pain and the search for escape. Some find escape routes through alcohol, the pub, or the cabaret. Others want to escape through drugs, morphine, cocaine, marijuana, and others through lust and sexual degeneration, etc. When we want to reduce our whole life to a trade, a profession, a system of making more and more money, the result is boredom, nuisance, and the search for escape. We should become complete, integral individuals, and that is only possible by knowing ourselves and dissolving the psychological ego. Fundamental education, at the same time that it stimulates the learning of a trade to earn a living, should also carry out something of more importance. It should help man to experience, to feel in all its aspect and in all the levels of the mind the process of existence. If someone has something to say, let him say it, and that of saying it is very interesting, because in this way every person creates for himself his own style. But to learn others' styles without having directly experienced life for oneself in an integral way only leads to superficiality. Chapter 35. The Machine Man. The machine man is the most unhappy beast that exists in this valley of tears, but he has the pretentiousness and even the insolence to call himself the king of nature. Nos te ipsum, man, know thyself. This is an ancient golden proverb written on the invincible walls of the temple at Delphi in ancient Greece. The man and woman of our times, that poor intellectual animal that mistakenly classifies himself as man, has invented thousands of very complicated and intricate machines. He knows very well that to be able to use a machine one sometimes needs long years of study and training, but when it comes to himself he totally forgets this fact, even though he himself is a machine more complicated than all the ones that he has invented. There is no man that is not filled with totally false ideas about himself. The most serious of all is that he does not want to realize that he really is a machine. The human machine does not have freedom of movement. It only functions through multiple and varied internal influences and external shocks. All movements, actions, words, ideas, emotions, feelings, desires of a human machine are provoked by external influences and by multiple, strange, and difficult internal causes. The intellectual animal is a wretched talking puppet with memory and vitality, a living doll that has the silly illusion that it can do when in reality it cannot do anything. Consider that the doll is alive, falls in love, speaks, walks, desires, wages, wars, etc. Consider that this doll can change owners at any moment. You should consider that each owner is a different person, a person who has his own criteria, his own form of enjoyment, feeling, living, etc. Any owner wanting to obtain money will push certain buttons, and then the doll will dedicate itself to business. Another owner, half an hour later or several hours later, will have a different idea and will make his doll dance and laugh. A third will make him fight. A fourth will make him fall in love with a woman. A fifth will make him fall in love with another woman. A sixth will make him fight with a neighbor and create a problem for himself and the police. And a seventh will make him change his address. In fact, the doll in our example has done nothing, but he thinks that he has. He has the illusion that he does when in fact he cannot do anything, because he does not have an individual being. Undoubtedly everything occurs just as when it rains, when it thunders, when the sun warms us, but the poor doll thinks that he can do. He has the silly illusion that he has done everything, but in reality, he has done nothing. Their respective owners have amused themselves with the poor, mechanical doll. This is the way the poor intellectual animal is, dear reader, a mechanical doll, just as in our illustrative example. He thinks he does when in fact he does nothing. He is a flesh and blood puppet controlled by a legion of energetic, subtle entities who as a whole constitute that which is called the pluralized ego. The Christian gospel classifies all those entities as demons, and their true name is legion. If we say that the ego is a legion of demons that control the human machine, we are not exaggerating. This is the case. The machine man does not have any individuality. He does not possess the being. Only the true being has the power to do. Only the being can give us true individuality. Only the being transforms us into true men and women. Whoever wants to truly stop being a simple mechanical doll should eliminate each of these entities that as a whole constitute the ego. Each of these egos play with the human machine. Whoever wants to truly stop being a simple mechanical doll has to start by admitting and understanding his own mechanicalness. He who does not want to understand nor accept his own mechanicalness, he who does not want to correctly understand this fact, can no longer change. He is an unfortunate, a wretch. It is better for him to tie a millstone around his neck and hurl himself into the sea. The intellectual animal is a machine, but a very special machine. If this machine manages to understand he is a machine, if he is guided well, and if circumstances allow him, he can stop being a machine and transform himself into a man. Before anything else, it is urgent to understand deeply and in all the levels of the mind that we do not have true individuality, that we do not have a permanent center of conscience, that in a specific moment we are one person and, in another moment, another person. Everything depends on the entity that controls the situation at any given instant. What originates the illusion of unity and integrity in the intellectual animal is partly the sensation of having a physical body, partly his name and surname, and partly memory and mechanical habits implanted in the memory by education or acquired by simple and silly imitation. The poor intellectual animal will not be able to stop being a machine. We will not be able to change, acquire true individual being and transform himself into a real man, as long as he does not have the courage to eliminate, through in-depth understanding and in a successive order, each of those metaphysical entities which as a whole constitute the ego, the myself. Each idea, passion, vice, affection, hatred, desire, etc., has its corresponding entity, and the mass of all of those entities is the pluralized ego of revolutionary psychology. All those metaphysical entities, all those selves which as a whole constitute the ego, do not have a true bond between them. They do not have coordinates of any type. Each of those entities depends totally on circumstances, change of impressions, happenings, etc. The screen of the mind changes colors and scenes at each instant. Everything depends on the entity that at any given instant controls the mind. On the screen of the mind, the different entities that in their entirety constitute the psychological ego pass through in a continuous procession. The diverse entities that constitute the pluralized ego associate themselves. They dissociate themselves from certain special groups according to their affinities. They quarrel among themselves, they argue, they avoid each other, etc. Each entity of the legion called self, each small self, believes itself to be everything, the total ego. It does not even remotely suspect that it is only the least part. The entity that today swears eternal love to a woman is displaced later on by another entity that has nothing to do with such an oath, and then dreams crumble to the floor and the poor disillusioned woman cries. The entity that today swears fidelity to a cause is displaced tomorrow by another entity that has nothing to do with such a cause, and then the person withdraws. The entity that today swears fidelity to Gnosis is displaced tomorrow by another entity that hates Gnosis. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities should study this book of fundamental education and for humanitarian purposes have the courage to guide students on the wonderful path of the revolution of conscience. It is necessary that students understand the need to know themselves in all the areas of the mind. A more efficient, intellectual orientation is needed. It is necessary to understand what we are, and this should begin from the desks at school. We do not deny that money is needed to eat, to pay the rent of the house and dress ourselves. We do not deny that intellectual preparation is needed, a profession, a way of making money, but that is not all, that is secondary. The first and fundamental part is to know who we are, what we are, where we came from, where we are going, what is the purpose of our existence. It is unfortunate to continue as automatic dolls, miserable mortals, machine men. It is urgent to stop being mere machines. It is urgent to become true men. A radical change is needed, and this should begin precisely with the elimination of each of those entities which as a whole constitute the pluralized ego. The poor intellectual animal is not a man, but he has within him a latent state all the possibilities to transform himself into a man. It is not a law of the development of those possibilities. The most natural thing is for them to be lost. Only through great super efforts can such human possibilities be developed. There is much to be eliminated and there is much to be acquired. It is necessary to do an inventory to find out how much is surplus and how much we are lacking. It is clear that the pluralized ego is unnecessary. It is something useless and harmful. It is logical to say that we have to develop certain powers, faculties, and capabilities that the machine man attributes to himself and believes he has, but in fact, he truly does not have. The machine man believes he has true individuality, awakened conscience, conscious willpower, the power to do, and he has none of these. If we want to stop being machines, if we want to awaken conscience, to have true conscious willpower, individuality, and the capacity to, it is urgent to start by knowing ourselves and then dissolving the psychological ego. When the pluralized ego is dissolved, only the true being remains within us. Chapter 36. Parents and Teachers. The most critical problem of education is not the students of primary, secondary schools or universities, but the parents and teachers. If parents and teachers do not know themselves, if they are not capable of understanding a boy or girl, if they do not know how to understand in depth their relationship with boys and girls who start living their lives, if they are only concerned with cultivating the intellect of those who they are educating, then how can we create a new type of education? The child, the student goes to school to receive conscious guidance, but if the teachers are of narrow criteria, conservative, reactionary, retardatory, so will the student be. Educators should re-educate themselves, know themselves, review all their knowledge and understand that we are entering a new age. Education is transformed by transforming the educators. To educate the educators is more difficult, because everyone who has read a lot, everyone who has a title, everyone who has to teach, everyone who works as a school teacher is already the way he is. His mind is bottled up in 50,000 theories that he has studied, and he would not change, he just never learns his lesson. Teachers should teach how to think, but unfortunately, they are only concerned with teaching what students should think about. Parents and teachers live full of terrible financial, social, and emotional worries, etc. Parents and teachers are mostly occupied with their own conflicts and sorrows. They are not seriously interested in studying and solving the problems that boys and girls of the new age pose to them. There exists tremendous mental, moral, and social degeneration, but parents and teachers are full of anxiety and personal concerns and only have time to think of the economic aspect of children, in giving them a profession so that they will not die of hunger, and that is all. Contrary to general belief, the majority of parents do not truly love their children. If they loved them, they would struggle for the common interest. They would be concerned with the problems of education with the purpose of achieving a true change. If parents truly loved their children, there would be no wars, the family and nation would not stand out above the world as a whole, since this creates problems, wars, damaging divisions, infernal situations, for our sons and daughters to live in. People study, they prepare themselves to become doctors, engineers, lawyers, etc., and on the other hand, they do not prepare for the most critical and most difficult task, to be parents. That family selfishness, that lack of love for our fellow humans, that policy of family isolation is absurd 100% because it becomes a factor in deterioration and constant social degeneration. Progress and true revolution are only possible by throwing down those famous Chinese walls that separate us, that isolate us from the rest of the world. All of us are one family, and it is absurd for us to torture one another and to only consider as family the few people that live with us. The selfish snobbery stops social progress, divides human beings, creates wars, privileged castes, economical problems, etc. When parents truly love their children, walls and the abominable armors of isolation will crumble into dust, and then the family will cease to be an egotistical and absurd circle. Once the selfish family walls have fallen, then there exists fraternal communion with all the other fathers and mothers, with teachers, with the whole of society. The result of true fraternity is true social transformation, real revolution of education for a better world. The educator should be more conscious. He should gather all the parents together and speak to them clearly. It is necessary that parents understand that the task of education should be carried out on the firm basis of mutual cooperation between parents and teachers. It is vital to tell parents that intellectual training is necessary, but that it is not everything. Something more is needed. It is necessary to teach boys and girls to know themselves, to get to know their own errors, their own psychological defects. Parents have to be told that children should be conceived out of love and not out of animal passion. It is cruel and merciless to project our animal desires, our violent sexual passions, our morbid sentimentalism and bestial emotions on our descendants. Sons and daughters are our own projections, and it is criminal to infect the world with bestial projections. Teachers of schools, colleges, and universities should gather all the parents in a meeting room with the sound purpose of teaching them the path of moral responsibility with regards to their children and with regards to society and the world. Educators have the duty of re-educating themselves and guiding fathers and mothers. We truly need to love in order to transform the world. We need to unite to raise, among all of us, the wonderful temple of the new age which in these moments is being initiated amongst the Augustan thunder of thought. Chapter 37. Conscience. People confuse conscience with intelligence or with intellect, and the very intelligent or intellectual person is called a conscious person. We affirm that conscience in man, beyond any doubt and without any fear of fooling ourselves, is a very particular type of understanding of internal knowledge, totally independent of all mental activity. The faculty of conscience permits us the knowledge of ourselves. Conscience gives us integral knowledge of what is, where it is, what is really known, what is certainly ignored. Revolutionary psychology teaches that only man himself can know his own conscience, and whether it exists or not at a given moment. Man himself and nobody else but himself can become aware for an instant that before that moment, he was not really conscious, that he had his conscience asleep. He will then forget that experience or keep it as a memory, as the memory of a strong experience. It is urgent to know that the conscience in the rational animal is not something continuous or permanent. Normally, the conscience in the intellectual animal called man sleeps profoundly. Rare, very rare are the moments in which the conscience is awake. The intellectual animal works, drives cars, marries, dies, etc., with his conscience totally asleep, and only in very exceptional moments does it awaken. A human being's life is a life of dreams. However, he believes he is awake and will never admit that he is dreaming, and that his conscience is asleep. If someone was to awaken, he would feel terribly ashamed of himself. He would immediately understand his tomfoolery, his own ridicule. This life is frightfully ridiculous, horribly tragic, and rarely sublime. If a boxer in the middle of a fight was to awaken all of a sudden, he would feel ashamed before the honorable public and would flee from the horrible respectable before the astonishment of the asleep and unconscious multitudes. When a human being admits he has his conscience asleep, you can be sure he has already begun to awaken. The reactionary schools of old-fashioned psychology that deny the existence of the conscience and even declare the term useless, reveal a most profound state of sleep. The henchmen of such schools sleep very profoundly in a practically infra and unconscious state. Those who confuse the conscience with psychological functions, thoughts, feelings, motor impulses, and sensations, are in fact very unconscious, and they sleep profoundly. Those who admit the existence of the conscience but flatly deny the different degrees of consciousness revel lack of conscious experience and sleep of the conscience. Every person who has, at least once, momentarily awakened, knows very well by personal experience that different degrees of observable consciousness exist in oneself. First, time, how long did we remain conscious? Second, frequency, how many times have we awakened consciousness? Third, amplitude and penetration, what was one conscious of? Revolutionary psychology and the ancient Philocles affirmed that through super efforts of a special kind, consciousness can be awakened and made continuous and controllable. Fundamental education has the aim of awakening the conscience. 10 or 15 years of study in school, college, and university are useless if when leaving the classrooms we are sleeping machines. It is not an exaggeration to affirm that through some great effort, the intellectual animal can become conscious of himself for at least a couple of minutes. Clearly, today there are rare exceptions that we must seek with the torch of Diogenes. Such rare cases are represented by the authentic men, Buddha, Jesus, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl, etc. These founders of religions possessed continuous consciousness. They were great enlightened men. Normally, people are not conscious of themselves. The illusion of being conscious in a continuous way is born from the memory and all processes of thought. A man who practices a retrospective exercise to remember his entire life can truly remember the number of times he married, how many children he begot, who his parents were, his teachers, etc. However, this does not mean awakening of consciousness. This is simply remembering unconscious actions, and that is all. It is necessary to repeat what we have said in preceding chapters. There are 4 states of conscience: sleep, waking state, self-consciousness, and objective consciousness. The poor intellectual animal mistakenly called man lives in 2 of these states only. One part of his life goes by in sleep and the other, in the wrongly called waking state, which is also sleep. A man who sleeps and dreams believes that he awakens by merely returning to the waking state, but in reality, during this waking state he continues dreaming. This is similar to sunrise. The stars become hidden due to the sunlight, but they continue to exist even when the physical eyes cannot perceive them. In normal life, a human being knows nothing of consciousness of himself and much less of objective consciousness. Nevertheless, people are proud and everyone thinks he or she is conscious of himself or herself. The intellectual animal firmly believes that he has consciousness of himself, and under no circumstances would he accept to be told that he is asleep and that he lives unconscious of himself. There are exceptional moments when the intellectual animal awakens, but these moments are very rare. They can occur in an instance of great danger, during an intense emotion, in some new circumstance, in some new unexpected situation, etc. It is truly a disgrace for the intellectual animal not to have any control over those fleeting states of consciousness, and that he cannot evoke them and make them continuous. Nevertheless, fundamental education affirms that a man can achieve control over consciousness and acquire self-consciousness. Revolutionary psychology has methods, scientific processes, to awaken conscience. If we want to awaken conscience, we need to start examining, studying, and then eliminating all those obstacles that appear on the path. In this book, we have taught the path to awakening conscience starting from school desks. Samael Aun Weor.